They say a single gunshot can change everything. Mine didn't just change my life. It nearly ended it. When Sheriff Dawson's bullet screamed past my head on that dusty Montana street in 1876, I thought I'd finally paid the ultimate price for sins I never committed. But then a stranger's voice cut through the crowd, defending the woman they all called ruined. What happened next? Stay with me until the end of this story, and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this tale of redemption travels across this broken, beautiful world. The stagecoach wheels had barely stopped turning when I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. Willow Creek. Montana territory stretched before me like a faded photograph. Weathered storefronts lined a single dirt street, their paint peeling under the relentless summer sun. Mountains rose in the distance, purple and imposing, indifferent to the small human dramas unfolding in their shadow. The air tasted of dust and horses, and something else I couldn't quite name. Regret, maybe. Or the particular flavor of desperation that comes from having nowhere else to go. I stepped down from the coach, my traveling dress already grimy from 3 days of hard riding. The driver tossed my trunk down without ceremony, and I caught it before it could hit the ground. Everything I owned in the world was in that trunk. It wasn't much. "Good luck, miss," the driver said, though his tone suggested I'd need considerably more than luck. He'd heard the whispers in Denver, no doubt. Everyone had. The street was busy for mid-afternoon. Women in simple calico dresses moved between the mercantile and the post office. Men clustered outside the saloon even at this early hour. A few children chased a hoop down the boardwalk, their laughter sharp and clear in the thin mountain air. Normal life. The kind of life I'd once taken for granted. I straightened my shoulders and picked up my trunk. Aunt Margaret's dress shop was supposed to be 3 buildings down from the hotel. She'd left it to me in her will, a final kindness from a woman I'd only met twice in my life. "Come west," her letter had said. "Start fresh where nobody knows your name." Except somebody always knows your name. I'd made it perhaps 20 feet when I felt the eyes on me. The conversations didn't stop exactly, but they shifted. Lowered. A woman with a basket of eggs turned to whisper to her companion, and both of them stared. A man in a black suit, the banker, I'd learn later, paused mid-stride and studied me with the cold calculation of someone assessing damaged goods. My trunk suddenly felt heavier. I kept walking. "That's her." The voice carried across the street, loud enough to be heard by anyone who cared to listen. And in a town this size, everyone cared to listen. "That's the Blake woman from Denver." I didn't turn around. Didn't acknowledge I'd heard. I'd learned in the past 6 months that silence was often the only defense available to women like me. "Heard she seduced her employer's husband," another voice chimed in. Female this time, which somehow stung worse. "Right under his wife's nose. Then acted all innocent when she got caught. The nerve showing her face here." My hands tightened on the trunk handle. "Keep walking, Eleanor. Just keep walking." I'd almost made it to the dress shop when I heard the footsteps behind me. Heavy boots on wooden planks, moving with deliberate purpose. My heart started hammering, but I forced myself to keep my pace steady. Don't show fear. Don't give them the satisfaction. "Miss Blake." The voice was male, authoritative. I turned slowly, keeping my expression neutral. The man wore a sheriff's star pinned to his vest. He was somewhere in his 40s, with a thick mustache and eyes that had seen too much and forgiven too little. Behind him stood 2 deputies, both young enough to still find cruelty entertaining. "Sheriff," I said evenly. "Heard you were coming to town." He hooked his thumbs in his belt, a gesture of casual power. "Thought maybe you'd reconsidered. Thought maybe you'd realized you weren't welcome here." A crowd was gathering. Of course it was. This was better than the traveling show that came through once a year. "My aunt left me property here," I said, proud that my voice didn't shake. "I have every legal right to claim it." "Legal right." Sheriff Dawson, I recognized the name from the letters my aunt had sent, smiled without humor. "That's a fancy phrase for a woman of your reputation." "I don't know what you've heard, Sheriff, but I know exactly what I've heard." He took a step closer, and I caught the smell of whiskey on his breath. Day drinking. Wonderful. "I heard you're the kind of woman who destroys families, who breaks up good Christian homes, who spreads her legs for any man with—" "That's enough," The words came from somewhere in the crowd, firm and cold as mountain ice. The sheriff's face flushed red, but he didn't turn around immediately. Testing, I realized, seeing if the challenge would hold. I said that's enough, Dawson. The crowd parted like water around a stone, and a man stepped forward into the street. He was tall, taller than the sheriff by a good 3 inches, with broad shoulders that came from actual work rather than posturing. His face was weathered, lined around the eyes in a way that suggested he spent his days squinting into the sun. Dark hair touched with gray at the temples, rough stubble on his jaw. He wore working clothes, worn denim, scuffed boots, a shirt that had seen better days. But he carried himself like he owned the ground he walked on. "Stay out of this, Ward," the sheriff growled. "This isn't your concern." "I'm making it my concern." The man, Ward, came to stand beside me. Not touching, not presumptuous, but present. A statement. "You're harassing a woman on a public street, Dawson. Pretty sure that's not in your job description." "I'm protecting this town from undesirable elements." "Funny. I remember when you used to actually do your job instead of bullying newcomers." Ward's voice was conversational, almost lazy, but there was steel underneath. "How long's it been since you patrolled the North Road? 3 weeks? 4? Cattle thieves are having a field day. But sure, let's stand here and intimidate a woman half your size. Real heroic." The sheriff's hand drifted toward his gun. The movement was small, almost unconscious, but I saw it. Ward saw it too. The lazy quality vanished from his stance, replaced by something coiled and dangerous. "Don't," Ward said softly. "Don't make that kind of mistake." For a long moment, nobody moved. The street had gone completely silent. Even the children had stopped playing to watch. Then the sheriff laughed, sharp and bitter. "You defending her, Ward? You know what she is?" "I know what you are, Dawson. That's more relevant. She's ruined goods, broken, used up. Any man who'd touch her would have to be careful." Ward's voice could have cut glass. "Real careful with your next words." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. Then, deliberately, he turned his attention back to me. His hand was still near his gun, still hovering with implied threat. "You should leave Willow Creek, Miss Blake," he said. "Tonight, before something unfortunate happens." And then so fast I barely saw it, he drew his pistol and fired. The gunshot was impossibly loud, deafening. The world slowed down to individual frames. The flash of gunpowder, the kick of the sheriff's hand, the whistle of the bullet passing so close to my head that I felt the heat of it against my temple. I didn't scream, couldn't scream. My body locked up completely, every muscle frozen. The bullet struck the wall behind me, sending splinters of wood flying. In the sudden ringing silence that followed, I heard those splinters patter to the ground like rain. "Jesus Christ!" Someone in the crowd gasped. Ward moved. One moment he was beside me, the next he had crossed the space between himself and the sheriff. His hand clamped around Dawson's wrist, forcing the gun toward the ground. "Are you out of your goddamn mind?" Ward's voice was low, dangerous. "You could have killed her." "Could have." The sheriff met his eyes without flinching. "Didn't. Just wanted to make a point about what happens to her kind in this town." "Her kind." Ward released the sheriff's wrist like it burned him. "And what kind is that exactly?" "The broken kind. The ruined kind. The kind that brings nothing but trouble wherever they go." Dawson holstered his weapon with deliberate slowness. "I'm doing you a favor, Ward. Stay away from this woman. She'll destroy you like she destroyed that family in Denver." "Is that right?" Ward's jaw was tight, muscle jumping beneath the skin. "Well then, I guess I should be grateful for your concern, Sheriff." "I mean it, Ward. This woman is poison." Ward turned to look at me then, really look at me, for the first time since he'd stepped into this nightmare. His eyes were brown, I noticed. Deep brown, like the earth after rain. And in them I saw something I hadn't seen in 6 months. Not pity, not disgust, but simple curiosity. Assessment without judgment. Then he turned back to the sheriff and smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "You know what, Dawson? I appreciate the warning. Truly, I do." He paused, letting the moment stretch. "But I've always had a fondness for broken things. In fact, He raised his voice, making sure every person on that street could hear him clearly. From now on, broken goods are the only kind I'll ever buy again. The street erupted. Gasps, exclamations. The sheriff's face turned purple with rage. You're making a mistake, Ward? Probably. Ward shrugged. Won't be my first. Won't be my last. He finally looked at me again. Miss Blake, was it? I managed to nod, though my head still felt disconnected from my body. The bullet. He'd shot at me. Sheriff Dawson had actually shot at me in broad daylight on a public street. I'm Caleb Ward. I run the Broken Spur Ranch about 5 miles west of town. He tipped his hat, the gesture absurdly formal given what had just happened. Welcome to Willow Creek. I apologize for the rather dramatic reception. My voice came out hoarse. I cleared my throat and tried again. Thank you for intervening. Don't thank me yet. I might have just made things worse for you. He glanced at the crowd, then back at me. But that's a problem for tomorrow. Today, let's get you settled before our good sheriff here decides to fire off any more warning shots. He picked up my trunk like it weighed nothing and started toward the dress shop. After a moment of paralysis, I followed. Behind us, I heard Sheriff Dawson spit into the dust. You're going to regret this, Ward, he called out. Both of you. This town has standards. We don't tolerate... Yeah. Caleb didn't turn around. Standards, morals, Christian values. Heard it all before, Dawson. Funny how those standards never seem to apply when you're 3 drinks deep at Martha's place on Friday nights. A few people in the crowd tried to hide their laughter. The sheriff's face went from purple to nearly black, but he didn't follow us. He just stood there in the middle of the street, hand still on his gun, watching as Caleb Ward carried my trunk to my aunt's shop and set it down by the door. This is you? He asked. I looked up at the faded sign, Margaret's Fine Dresses and Alterations. My aunt's handwriting, still visible despite the wear of weather and time. This is me, I confirmed. Caleb nodded. Good location, right in the center of everything. He paused. Which also means right where everyone can watch you. That's going to be a challenge. I'm aware. No, I don't think you are. He leaned against the post, studying me with those earth-brown eyes. Willow Creek is a small town, Miss Blake. Small towns have long memories and short tempers. What happened just now, that wasn't the end of something. That was the beginning. Then why did you help me? The question burst out before I could stop it. If I'm such poison, such a threat to your town's precious standards, why didn't you just let the sheriff run me off? Caleb was quiet for a moment, considering. Then he said, because I know a little something about being judged for things you didn't do. And because, he gestured toward the sheriff, still visible down the street, any man who'd fire a gun that close to an unarmed woman's head isn't interested in justice. He's interested in power. And I've got no patience for bullies, no matter what badge they wear. I felt something crack inside my chest, something hard and protective that had been holding me together for months. I didn't do what they said, I whispered, in Denver. I didn't seduce anyone. I didn't... Miss Blake. Caleb held up a hand, stopping me. You don't owe me your story. You don't owe anyone your story. You want to tell it, that's your choice. But you're here now, and this is your property. And you've got every right to be here regardless of what happened back in Denver. But you called me broken goods. No. His expression softened slightly. I said I had a fondness for broken things. There's a difference. I don't see how. Broken things can be fixed, or better yet, he pushed off from the post, preparing to leave. They can be appreciated exactly as they are. Sometimes the cracks are what make something valuable, something real. He tipped his hat again. I'll be around, Miss Blake. You need anything, Broken Spur Ranch. Anyone in town can give you directions. Wait, I called after him. Why did you really help me? The truth. Caleb turned back, and for the first time I saw something raw in his expression, something wounded. Because 6 years ago, when my wife died, this town decided I killed her. Decided I must have done something to cause the fever that took her. Some of them still believe it. He smiled, but there was no humor in it. So yeah, I know what it's like to be called broken, to be judged for tragedy instead of given sympathy. and I'll be damned if I stand by and watch it happen to someone else." He walked away before I could respond, his long stride carrying him back down the street. The crowd had mostly dispersed, though a few stragglers remained, whispering and watching. I turned to the shop door. The key my aunt's lawyer had sent was in my reticule, heavy and old-fashioned. I fitted it into the lock with shaking hands. The door swung open, and the smell hit me first. Dust and fabric and the faint sweet scent of the lavender sachets my aunt had apparently favored. The interior was dim, shutters closed against the afternoon sun. As my eyes adjusted, I made out the shapes of a cutting table, a dress form, shelves lined with bolts of fabric, and silence. Blessed, overwhelming silence. I stepped inside, closed the door behind me, and finally let myself shake. Let myself feel the full weight of what had just happened. The sheriff had shot at me, actually fired a gun at my head, and Caleb Ward, a complete stranger, had defended me. Broken goods are the only kind I'll ever buy again. The words echoed in my head as I sank down onto a wooden stool, my legs suddenly unable to hold me upright. What had he meant by that? Was it kindness? Mockery? Some strange Western code I didn't understand? I didn't know. Couldn't know. All I knew was that I was here, in this dusty shop, in this hostile town, with nothing but a trunk full of clothes and a stranger's cryptic declaration standing between me and complete disaster. Outside, I heard footsteps on the boardwalk, voices passing by. Did you see that? Ward defending that woman? Fool's going to regret it, mark my words. Maybe she's got her hooks in him already. That's what her kind does. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply, trying to calm the racing of my heart. This was going to be so much harder than I'd thought. The next morning arrived with cruel cheerfulness. Bright sunshine streaming through the gaps in the shutters, birds singing in the cottonwood trees outside, the whole world pretending yesterday hadn't happened. I'd spent the night upstairs in my aunt's old quarters, lying awake on a narrow bed that smelled of mothballs, listening to the sounds of the town settling into sleep. Horses. Distant laughter from the saloon, a dog barking, normal sounds, safe sounds. But every time I closed my eyes, I heard that gunshot, felt the heat of the bullet passing by my face. By dawn, I'd given up on sleep entirely. I rose, washed in cold water from the basin, and dressed in my simplest work dress, dark blue cotton, practical and unremarkable. If I was going to survive in Willow Creek, I needed to become invisible, unremarkable. The opposite of the Scarlet Woman they all believed me to be. The shop needed work, a lot of work. I spent the morning opening shutters, sweeping floors, taking inventory of what my aunt had left behind. Bolts of fabric in varying states of age, some beautiful silks that must have come from San Francisco, others simple cotton more suited to ranch wives and working women. Threads in every color, buttons, lace, the tools of the trade. My aunt had been a skilled seamstress. I could see that. The sample dresses hanging on the wall were beautifully constructed, with careful attention to detail, but there weren't many of them, and dust covered everything. How long had the shop been closed? The lawyer's letter had been vague on details. I was elbow-deep in a trunk of trim and ribbons when the door opened. I straightened quickly, heart hammering, half expecting the sheriff. Instead, a young woman stood in the doorway. She was perhaps 16 or 17, with auburn hair pulled back in a practical bun and a scatter of freckles across her nose. She wore a simple calico dress and carried a basket covered with a checked cloth. We stared at each other for a long moment. "Miss Blake?" she asked finally. "Yes." "I'm Molly Peterson." She held up the basket. "My ma sent this. Some bread and preserves," she said. The girl hesitated, then continued in a rush. "She said you probably didn't have time to shop yesterday, what with the excitement and all." Excitement. That was one way to describe nearly being shot. "That's very kind," I said carefully. "Please thank your mother for me." Molly set the basket on the cutting table, then didn't leave. She stood there, twisting her hands in her apron, clearly wanting to say something but not quite daring. "Is there something else?" I asked gently. "Are you really from Denver?" Here it comes, I thought, the questions, the judgment. "I am." "And did you really—" Molly stopped herself, blushing furiously. "Sorry, Ma said I wasn't to pry. Said it wasn't Christian. Your mother sounds like a wise woman. She is. Molly's eyes drifted around the shop, taking in the fabrics, the dress forms, the sewing implements. Ma also said you might be looking for help. That Miss Margaret used to have a girl come in 3 days a week to help with simpler work, hems and such. I felt a flutter of hope. And you're interested? I'm good with a needle, Molly said quickly. Been sewing since I was little. Ma taught me. And I'm careful, and I'm quick, and I... She took a breath. And I don't care what they're all saying about you. Molly. I mean it, Miss Blake. Whatever happened in Denver, that's your business. You're here now, and you own this shop, and you deserve a fair chance. That's what Ma says, and I agree. I felt my throat tighten with unexpected emotion. 2 people. In a town that wanted me gone, 2 people had shown me kindness. This girl and her mother, whoever she was. I would be grateful for the help, I managed. I can't pay much, not right away. Not until I build up business again. But once I do, 3 days a week, Molly said firmly. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 4 hours each day. And you can pay me whatever you think is fair once the shop's doing better. That's incredibly generous. That's just being decent, Molly corrected, which is more than most folks in this town manage on a regular day. She proved her worth immediately, diving into the organization with the enthusiasm of youth. Together we sorted fabrics, cleaned surfaces, arranged the front window display. By midday, the shop looked almost presentable. Almost. You're going to need new stock, Molly observed, surveying our work critically. Miss Margaret's fabrics are beautiful, but they're old. Ladies want what's fashionable now, not what was fashionable 5 years ago. I'll order from the catalogs, I said, as soon as I can afford to. You could also make the rounds? Visit the ranches, offer custom work. That's what Miss Margaret used to do before her rheumatism got bad. The ranch wives don't come to town much, especially in summer. Too hot, too much work at home, but they still need dresses, still want to feel pretty. It was good advice, smart advice, but the thought of riding out to ranches, of facing more hostile crowds, made my stomach clench. I'll think about it, I said. Molly gave me a look that suggested she knew exactly what I was thinking, but she didn't push. Instead, she said, Mr. Ward was here earlier before you came downstairs. My hand stilled on the bolt of blue cotton I'd been refolding. What? Caleb Ward, from the Broken Spur. He knocked around dawn, but you didn't answer, so he left this. Molly produced an envelope from her apron pocket. Said I should give it to you when I saw you. I took the envelope with trembling fingers. My name was written on the front in strong, slanted handwriting. Miss Eleanor Blake. Aren't you going to open it? Molly asked, curiosity bright in her eyes. I slid my finger under the seal and pulled out a single sheet of paper. Miss Blake, I expect you'll be receiving visitors today. Some friendly, most not. Remember what I said. Stand your ground. You have every right to be here. The sheriff's been spreading stories. Ignore them. Men like Dawson feed on fear, and if you don't give him that satisfaction, he'll eventually move on to easier prey. If you need anything, send word to the Broken Spur. If you need nothing, burn this letter and forget I wrote it. C.W. What's it say? Molly couldn't contain herself any longer. I folded the letter carefully and tucked it into my pocket. Just advice about the town. Mr. Ward's a good man, Molly said firmly. Whatever else people say about him, he's fair. Treats his ranch hands decent, pays on time, doesn't cheat. That's rare out here. What do people say about him? I asked, then immediately regretted it. Sorry, that's gossip, and I shouldn't. No, you should, Molly interrupted. If you're going to live here, you should know how things stand. She lowered her voice, though we were alone in the shop. Mr. Ward's wife died 6 years back. Fever. Perfectly natural. But his wife, Mrs. Catherine Ward, she was the daughter of old Thomas Dawson. My blood ran cold. Dawson, as in the sheriff's sister. Yes, Molly nodded grimly. Sheriff Dawson never forgave Mr. Ward for Catherine's death, convinced himself that Mr. Ward must have done something to cause it, worked her too hard, didn't call the doctor soon enough, something, started all sorts of ugly rumors. Most folks don't believe them anymore, but the sheriffs never let it go. That's horrible. That's Willow Creek, Molly corrected. We're small enough that grudges last forever, and big enough that you can't quite escape them. She paused. So when Mr. Ward stood up for you yesterday, he wasn't just defending a stranger. He was standing up to his dead wife's brother. That takes courage. Or foolishness, I thought. Or maybe both. The door opened again, and we both jumped. But it was just old Mrs. Patterson from the boarding house down the street, squinting into the shop's dim interior. Is it true? She demanded without preamble. Are you really opening this place back up? Yes, ma'am, I said, falling automatically into the careful politeness I'd learned in Denver, the politeness that had done me no good whatsoever when accusations started flying. I'm Eleanor Blake, Margaret's niece. I'll be continuing her business. Mrs. Patterson shuffled closer, her eyes sharp despite her age. She looked me up and down with the thoroughness of a livestock inspector. Heard you were trouble, she said finally. I've heard the same, I replied evenly. That surprised her. Her eyebrows shot up, disappearing into her gray hair. Heard Caleb Ward defended you. He did. I heard the sheriff took a shot at you. He did. Mrs. Patterson made a humming noise deep in her throat. Then abruptly she said, I need a new dress. Something respectable for church, but not too plain. I'm 73 years old and I'll be damned if I spend my final years looking like a scarecrow. Can you manage that, or are you too busy being scandalous? I blinked. Then slowly, I smiled. I think I can manage that, Mrs. Patterson. Good. I'll come by tomorrow for measurements, and she pointed a gnarled finger at me. If you do good work, I'll tell the other ladies. We take care of our own in this town, Miss Blake. Question is, are you one of us, or are you just passing through? I'm here to stay, I said firmly. Then I suppose we'll see, won't we? She shuffled out, leaving Molly and me staring at each other. That was Mrs. Patterson, Molly said unnecessarily. She's the biggest gossip in Willow Creek. If she approves of you, or even if she just doesn't actively disapprove, half the town will follow her lead. And the other half? Will follow the sheriff, Molly said grimly. This town's split right down the middle on most things. You're going to become one more thing people take sides over. She was right. By the end of the week, the battle lines were clear. Mrs. Patterson came for her fitting and brought two friends, Mrs. Chen from the laundry and young widow named Alice Thornton. They commissioned dresses, paid deposits, and asked polite questions about fabric choices. Word spread. Other women came. Not many, but enough. Enough to give me hope. But for every woman who walked through my door, two more crossed the street to avoid passing the shop. The banker's wife, Mrs. Whitman, gave me a look of such pure disdain when we passed on the boardwalk that I felt it like a physical blow. The preacher's wife organized a prayer circle specifically to pray for my redemption. And Sheriff Dawson made a point of walking past the shop several times a day, his hand always on his gun, his message clear, I'm watching you. Through it all, Caleb Ward stayed away. I told myself I was glad. Told myself that his absence was wise, that he'd done enough already, that I didn't need a white knight riding to my rescue every time someone looked at me sideways. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't look for him. Didn't scan the street every time I heard horses. Didn't wonder what had happened to the man who'd declared broken goods were the only kind he'd buy. 2 weeks after my arrival, the answer came. I was closing up shop for the day, pulling the shutters closed against the coming night, when I heard boots on the boardwalk behind me. I turned, half expecting trouble. Instead, I found Caleb Ward, hat in hand, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. Miss Blake, he said. I hope I'm not disturbing you. Not at all. My heart was doing something complicated in my chest. I was just finishing up. I know it's late, and I know I've been scarce since that first day, but he cleared his throat. I was wondering if I might commission some work from you. Of all the things I'd expected him to say, that wasn't it. Of course, I managed. What did you have in mind? A dress for my housekeeper, Mrs. Chen. Her birthday's coming up, and she's been using the same 3 dresses for the past 5 years. Figured it was time someone did something nice for her. Mrs. Chen, the woman who'd come in with Mrs. Patterson, who'd been kind and professional and hadn't asked a single question about Denver. I'd be honored, I said. Do you know her measurements? Caleb looked sheepish. Not specifically, but she's about, he gestured vaguely, this tall, maybe, and sort of medium-sized? Despite everything, I laughed. That's not exactly precise, Mr. Ward. I figured. That's why I was hoping you could come out to the ranch and measure her yourself. Make a proper job of it. He paused. I'd pay your travel time, of course, and I'd make sure you were back to town before dark. It was a reasonable request. A professional request. Exactly the kind of house call Molly had suggested I should be making. So why did it feel like something more? When were you thinking? I asked carefully. Day after tomorrow? Saturday? Mrs. Chen has the afternoon off, so she'd be available. Saturday would be fine. Good. Caleb settled his hat back on his head. I'll come by around 1 o'clock then, with the wagon. He started to leave, then turned back. Miss Blake? Eleanor? It was the first time he'd used my given name. For what it's worth, I think you're doing fine. Building a life here, standing your ground. It's not easy, and most people wouldn't have the courage. I don't feel very courageous, I admitted. That's usually when we're most brave, he said quietly. When we're terrified, but we do the thing anyway. Then he was gone, disappearing into the gathering dusk, leaving me standing alone on the boardwalk with my heart racing and my mind spinning with questions I didn't dare ask. Saturday came too quickly and too slowly at the same time. I dressed carefully, my green traveling dress, practical but pretty, with my hair pinned up neatly beneath my bonnet. Professional, businesslike. Absolutely not like a woman who'd spent the past 2 days thinking about earth-brown eyes and strong hands and the way Caleb Ward's voice got quiet when he talked about courage. He arrived precisely at 1 o'clock with a sturdy wagon and a pair of horses that looked well cared for. He helped me up onto the seat without comment, his hand warm through my glove. The ride to the Broken Spur took 40 minutes, following a dusty road that wound between hills covered in sagebrush and wildflowers. Caleb didn't talk much, but the silence was comfortable rather than awkward. He pointed out landmarks, a creek where the fishing was good, a stand of aspens that turned gold in the fall, the spot where he'd once seen a mountain lion. You're not from Montana originally, I observed. Texas. Born and raised. He smiled slightly. Came north after the war. Wanted to start fresh somewhere that didn't have quite so many ghosts. Did it work? For a while. His expression darkened. Then Catherine died, and I realized ghosts follow you wherever you go. I'm sorry for your loss. It was 6 years ago. That doesn't make it hurt less, I said quietly. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and something passed between us. Understanding, recognition, the particular knowledge that comes from shared grief. No, he agreed, it doesn't. The Broken Spur Ranch appeared over a rise, a collection of sturdy buildings arranged around a central yard. The main house was larger than I'd expected, with a wide porch and real glass windows, barns, corrals, a bunkhouse for the hands. It was prosperous, well-maintained, the kind of place that spoke of hard work and careful management. Mrs. Chen came out to meet us, wiping flour-covered hands on her apron. When she saw me, her weathered face creased into a smile. Miss Blake, Mr. Ward said you'd be coming, but I wasn't sure if he was serious. Very serious, Caleb said, helping me down from the wagon. It's your birthday present, and I won't hear any arguments about it. We spent the next hour in comfortable domesticity. Mrs. Chen and I in her room, while I took measurements and discussed fabric options and style preferences. She wanted something practical, but pretty, she said. Something that wouldn't show dirt too easy, but would still make her feel like a woman instead of just a cook. I knew exactly what she meant. When I emerged from Mrs. Chen's quarters, measurements and notes safely tucked in my reticule, I found Caleb waiting on the porch with 2 glasses of lemonade. Thought you might be thirsty, he said, handing me one. We sat in the porch chairs watching the afternoon shadows lengthen across the yard. Ranch hands moved between buildings, tending to evening chores. Cattle lowed in the distance. A dog, some kind of shepherd mix, sprawled in the dust by the porch steps, tongue lolling. It's peaceful here, I said. It is now, wasn't always. Caleb took a long drink of his lemonade. When Catherine first got sick, this place felt like a prison. Every room reminded me of her. Every corner held a memory I couldn't escape. I almost sold it, almost packed up and moved even further west. What stopped you? Stubbornness, mostly. He smiled wryly, and the realization that running doesn't actually solve anything. You can change your location, but you take yourself with you. All your pain, all your regrets. They don't care about geography. Is that why you defended me? The question escaped before I could stop it. Because you understood what it was like to be judged unfairly? Caleb was quiet for so long I thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he said, I defended you because what the sheriff did was wrong. Simple as that. But yes, I understand something about false accusations, about having a whole town decide they know your story better than you do. Do you want to know my story? I asked quietly. The real one? Only if you want to tell it. So I did. There, on Caleb Ward's porch, with the Montana sun sinking toward the mountains and evening coming on gentle and cool, I told him everything. I told him about my job in Denver, working as a governess for the Montgomery family, about how Mr. Montgomery had started making advances, subtle at first, then increasingly bold, about how I'd rejected him firmly, professionally, repeatedly, about how his wife had eventually caught him cornering me in the library, his hands on my arms, his mouth seeking mine while I pushed him away. I told him how Mrs. Montgomery had screamed, how the household had erupted in chaos, how Mr. Montgomery had claimed I'd seduced him, that I'd been throwing myself at him for months, that his wife had caught us mid-affair. I told him about being dismissed without references, about the rumors that spread through Denver like wildfire, about how no one would hire me, how former friends crossed the street to avoid me, how landlords suddenly had no rooms available when they heard my name. I told him everything, and when I was done, my throat was raw and my eyes were burning with unshed tears. Caleb didn't say anything for a long moment, just sat there, glass of lemonade sweating in his hand, eyes fixed on the horizon. Then he said, "Thank you for telling me. You believe me?" The question came out smaller than I'd intended. He turned to look at me and his expression was fierce. Of course I believe you. Why wouldn't I? Everyone else in the world seems to think. Everyone else in the world didn't see how you handled yourself when Dawson shot at you, Caleb interrupted. Didn't see how you've built a business from nothing in a hostile town. Didn't watch you treat Mrs. Chen with such kindness and respect despite everything you're dealing with. He set his glass down with deliberate care. I don't know much, Eleanor Blake, but I know character when I see it. And yours is solid steel. Something cracked inside me then, some last wall I'd been holding up against the world. I turned away quickly, pressing my hand to my mouth, trying to hold back the sob that wanted to escape. Caleb's hand settled warm and solid on my shoulder. Not presumptuous, not romantic, just present, steady. You're going to be fine, he said quietly. It's going to be hard, and it's going to take time, but you're going to be fine. You know how I know? I shook my head, not trusting my voice. Because you're already doing it. You're already building a life here, already making friends, already standing your ground despite everything this town's throwing at you. His hand squeezed gently. That's not breaking, Eleanor. That's bending without snapping. That's the strongest thing a person can do. I managed to get myself under control, wiping my eyes with the back of my hand. I'm sorry, I don't usually... Don't apologize. You've earned the right to a few tears. We sat there until the sun touched the mountains, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Then Caleb drove me back to town, the horses moving at a comfortable walk, in no particular hurry. When we reached the dress shop, he helped me down from the wagon and said, Mrs. Chen's dress. Do you have everything you need? I do. I'll have it ready in 2 weeks. Perfect. He hesitated, hat in hand. Eleanor, there's a harvest dance coming up, 3 weeks from Saturday. The whole town attends. It's tradition. And I was wondering if you might, that is, if you'd like to... He trailed off, looking uncharacteristically flustered. Are you asking me to accompany you to the dance, Mr. Ward? Caleb, he corrected. And yes, I am. Though I should warn you, if you say yes, you'll be making a statement. People will talk. They'll probably talk badly. They already talk badly, I pointed out. Fair point. He smiled. So, will you come? I thought about Sheriff Dawson, about the whispers and the cross streets and the looks of disdain, about how attending a public dance on Caleb Ward's arm would be seen as confirmation of everything they already believed about me. I thought about Mrs. Patterson and Mrs. Chen and Molly, about the small kindnesses that had kept me afloat these past weeks. I thought about Caleb standing up to the sheriff, risking his own reputation to defend a stranger, about broken goods and bending without snapping. Yes, I said, I'd like that very much. His smile was like the sun breaking through storm clouds. Then it's a date. I'll pick you up at 7. He drove away, leaving me standing in front of the shop with my heart racing and a smile I couldn't quite suppress. Behind me, I heard a window close with a sharp snap. Mrs. Whitman, I saw, had been watching from the boarding house across the street. Her expression was cold enough to freeze water. Let her watch, I thought. Let them all watch. I was done apologizing for things I hadn't done. Done shrinking myself to fit their expectations. Done running from judgments I didn't deserve. If Willow Creek wanted a scandal, I'd give them something better. I'd give them the truth. I'd show them that Eleanor Blake wasn't broken, wasn't ruined, wasn't anything except a woman trying to build an honest life. And if a certain rancher with earth-brown eyes wanted to stand beside me while I did it, well, that was just an unexpected gift in a season that had been painfully short on kindness. I went inside, lit the lamps, and got to work on Mrs. Chen's dress. There was measuring to do, patterns to draft, fabric to cut, and in 3 weeks there would be a dance. The thought made me smile all over again. The 2 weeks passed in a blur of needle and thread, measurements and fittings, quiet mornings and anxious evenings. Mrs. Chen's dress took shape under Eleanor's hands, a deep burgundy cotton with black piping and mother-of-pearl buttons she'd found in the very back of her aunt's supply chest. It was elegant without being ostentatious, the kind of dress that would make a hard-working woman feel beautiful without making her feel foolish. Molly declared it perfect when Eleanor finished the final hem on a Wednesday afternoon, the sunlight streaming through the shop windows turning the burgundy fabric nearly crimson. Mrs. Chen's going to cry when she sees it, Molly predicted, running her fingers along the careful stitching. It's the prettiest thing I've seen all year. I hope she likes it, Eleanor said, though privately she was proud of the work. It had been months since she'd sewn anything this elaborate. Months since she'd had the mental space to focus on creating something beautiful rather than just surviving. She'll love it. And more importantly, Molly's eyes gleamed with mischief. Mr. Ward's going to see it when he comes to pick it up, and he's going to realize what talented hands you have, and then, Molly Peterson, you are entirely too romantic for your own good. Maybe, Molly conceded cheerfully. But I'm not wrong. Everyone in town knows he asked you to the harvest dance. Mrs. Patterson told my ma, who told Mrs. Willis at the Mercantile, who told basically everyone with ears. It's the most exciting thing that's happened since the Miller twins got caught stealing pies from the bakery. Eleanor's stomach twisted with anxiety. She'd been trying not to think too much about the dance, about what it meant, about how the town would react. But Molly's words made it impossible to ignore. Do you think I'm making a mistake? She asked quietly. Going with him? Molly's expression turned serious. I think you're doing exactly what you should be doing, living your life. You like Mr. Ward, don't you? I barely know him. That's not what I asked. Eleanor set down her scissors and met Molly's eyes. Yes, she admitted, I like him. He's kind and honest, and he sees me as a person instead of a scandal. But that doesn't mean, then that's all that matters, Molly interrupted firmly. The rest is just noise, Miss Blake. Just people with too much time and too little charity talking because it makes them feel important. You can't live your life trying to please them. You'll drive yourself mad trying. The girl was wise beyond her years, Eleanor thought, or maybe just practical in the way young people often were, unencumbered by the weight of experience and disappointment. Before she could respond, the shop door opened and Caleb Ward stepped inside, hat in hand, looking slightly windblown from the ride into town. Ladies, he greeted them both with a nod. Hope I'm not interrupting. Not at all, Eleanor managed, acutely aware that her hair was coming loose from its pins and she had thread marks on her fingers. Mrs. Chen's dress is ready, actually. Let me get it for you. She disappeared into the back room where the dress hung carefully wrapped in muslin, taking an extra moment to compose herself. Why did the sight of Caleb Ward make her feel like a schoolgirl? She was 26 years old, for heaven's sake. She'd survived scandal and unemployment and a sheriff's bullet. She should be well past the point of getting flustered by a handsome rancher with kind eyes. But when she returned to the main room and saw him talking quietly with Molly, laughing at something the girl had said, her heart did that complicated thing in her chest again. "Here it is," she said, laying the wrapped dress on the cutting table. She carefully folded back the muslin. "I hope it's what you had in mind." Caleb's expression softened as he took in the burgundy dress with its careful details. "It's perfect. Better than perfect. Mrs. Chen's going to—" He paused, and Eleanor could swear his eyes looked slightly damp. "She's going to be so happy. Thank you, Eleanor." "It was my pleasure." She meant it. Creating something beautiful for someone who deserved beauty, that felt like the best kind of work. Caleb paid her more than they'd agreed upon, she noticed, but when she tried to protest, he just shook his head and carefully bundled the dress to take back to the ranch. But he didn't leave immediately. Instead, he turned to face her fully, suddenly looking uncertain again. "About the dance," he began. Eleanor's heart sank. He's changed his mind, she thought. He's realized what a liability I am, how much trouble I'll cause him. "I wanted to make sure you still wanted to go," Caleb continued. "I know people have been talking, know that showing up together is going to cause a stir. If you've reconsidered, if you'd rather not deal with the attention—" "I haven't reconsidered," Eleanor said quickly. Too quickly, perhaps, but she didn't care. "Unless you have?" "No." The word was firm, immediate. "I just wanted to make sure you knew what you were getting into." "I think I have a pretty good idea," Eleanor said dryly. "Small town, big gossip, hostile sheriff. Did I miss anything?" That surprised a laugh out of him. "When you put it that way, it sounds almost exciting." "It certainly won't be boring." "No," he agreed, his eyes warm. "It certainly won't be." After he left, Molly turned to Eleanor with a knowing smile. "You like him a lot, don't you?" "Hush, Eleanor said, but she couldn't quite hide her own smile. "Don't you have hems to work on?" "I do, but watching you and Mr. Ward dance around each other is much more interesting than hemming Mrs. Patterson's underskirts." "Molly!" The girl laughed and went back to her sewing, leaving Eleanor alone with her thoughts and the lingering warmth of Caleb's visit. The remaining days until the dance crawled by with agonizing slowness. Eleanor threw herself into work, taking on every commission she could manage. Mrs. Patterson's church dress, 2 everyday dresses for Alice Thornton, a christening gown for the blacksmith's new baby. Each piece of work was a small victory, a tiny indication that maybe, just maybe, she was building something sustainable here. But not everyone was convinced. One afternoon, as Eleanor was walking back from the mercantile with thread and buttons, she nearly collided with Mrs. Whitman coming out of the post office. "Oh," Mrs. Whitman said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Miss Blake, I heard you'll be attending the harvest dance." That's right," Eleanor replied evenly, refusing to be baited. "With Mr. Ward." It wasn't a question. "Yes." Mrs. Whitman's lips pursed into a thin line. "How interesting. I wouldn't have thought a man of Mr. Ward's standing would want to be seen with someone of your background." Eleanor felt her temper flare but kept her voice calm. "I'm not sure what you mean, Mrs. Whitman." "Oh, I think you know exactly what I mean, dear." The endearment was poisonous. "A woman with your reputation parading herself at a respectable community event? It's rather bold, don't you think?" "I think," Eleanor said carefully, "that I've been invited to a public dance by a respectable member of this community, and I've accepted. I don't see how that's anyone's business but ours." "Everything is everyone's business in Willow Creek, Miss Blake. The sooner you learn that, the better." Mrs. Whitman adjusted her gloves with precise, angry movements. "Mark my words, this will end badly. For you and for poor Mr. Ward. Men are so easily fooled by a pretty face and a sad story." She swept past before Eleanor could respond, leaving her standing on the boardwalk with her heart pounding and her hands shaking with suppressed rage. Don't mind her, a voice said from behind. Eleanor turned to find Alice Thornton, the young widow, watching with sympathetic eyes. Amelia Whitman's been the self-appointed guardian of this town's morals since her husband became president of the bank. She thinks it gives her the right to judge everyone else. Does she know about you? Eleanor asked quietly. About your commissions? Alice smiled slightly. She knows. She doesn't approve. But my late husband's family has money, which means I have money, which means she can't quite afford to cut me completely. It's all very political and exhausting. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. But you, Miss Blake, you don't have that protection. You should be careful. I'm tired of being careful, Eleanor admitted. Careful got me nowhere in Denver. Maybe it's time to try something different. Brave, Alice observed, or foolish. Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference. Caleb said something similar, that bravery is just being terrified but doing the thing anyway. He's a good man, Alice said softly. One of the best. If you hurt him, this town will never forgive you. The words were gentle, but the warning was clear. Eleanor met Alice's eyes and nodded. I have no intention of hurting him. Good. Alice's expression softened. Then I hope you both have a wonderful time at the dance, and I hope you wear something spectacular just to give Amelia Whitman fits. She walked away, leaving Eleanor with a small smile and a sudden determination. Something spectacular. Yes, that's exactly what she'd do. That evening, after Molly had gone home and the shop was quiet, Eleanor pulled out her finest fabric, a deep emerald green silk that her aunt had apparently been saving for something special. It was beautiful, luxurious, probably worth more than everything else in the shop combined. Eleanor had been planning to sell it, to use the money for supplies and rent. But looking at it now, feeling the weight and texture of it, she made a different choice. She would make herself a dress. A real dress, the kind she used to wear in Denver before everything fell apart. The kind that made a woman feel powerful and beautiful and worthy of respect. If she was going to make a statement at the harvest dance, she'd make it properly. The work consumed her. Every spare moment was spent cutting, pinning, stitching. The dress took shape slowly, a fitted bodice with a square neckline, sleeves that fell gracefully to the elbow, a skirt that moved like water. She added black velvet trim at the waist and cuffs, found jet buttons that caught the light like tiny stars. It was the most beautiful thing she'd ever made. Molly discovered the dress 3 days before the dance and literally gasped. Miss Blake, oh my goodness, you're going to be the most beautiful woman there. That's not the goal, Eleanor said, though secretly she was pleased by Molly's reaction. The goal is just to look respectable. You're going to look like a queen, Molly corrected. Mrs. Whitman's going to choke on her punch. Molly! What? It's true. And you know what? Good. She deserves it. The girl's expression turned fierce. You deserve to feel beautiful, Miss Blake. After everything you've been through, you deserve to walk into that dance hall with your head high and show everyone exactly what they've been missing. Eleanor felt her eyes burn with unexpected tears. When did you get so wise? I learned from the best, Molly said simply, and went back to her hemming. Saturday arrived with perfect weather, clear blue skies and temperatures that promised a comfortable evening. Eleanor spent the day in a state of nervous anticipation, alternating between excitement and terror. What if something went wrong? What if the sheriff caused a scene? What if she tripped on her hem or spilled punch on her dress or said something foolish? What if Caleb looked at her in the emerald silk and regretted asking her? By the time 7 o'clock approached, she'd nearly worked herself into a panic. But then she looked at herself in the mirror, really looked, and something settled inside her. The woman in the mirror was elegant, poised, beautiful in a quiet, confident way that had nothing to do with trying to please anyone else. Her dark hair was swept up in a simple but elegant style, with a few curls framing her face. The emerald silk made her eyes look greener, her skin luminous. She looked like a woman who belonged at a harvest dance, who had every right to be there. She looked like herself again. The Eleanor she'd been before Denver tried to break her. The knock came at precisely 7 o'clock. Eleanor took a deep breath, picked up her shawl, and descended the stairs from her living quarters to the shop. Caleb stood waiting by the door, and the look on his face when he saw her made every hour of sewing worth it. Eleanor, he breathed. "You look—" "I don't have words." "Is that good or bad?" she asked, aiming for levity to cover her nervousness. "That's very, very good." He offered his arm. "The wagon's outside. I promise I tried to make it as comfortable as possible, but it's still a wagon." "I don't mind wagons," Eleanor assured him, taking his arm. The muscle was solid beneath her fingers, steady and strong. He'd made an effort too, she noticed. Clean shirt, pressed trousers, his hair neatly combed, and his jaw freshly shaved. He smelled of soap and leather and something else, pine, maybe, or sage. It was pleasant, masculine, comforting. The ride to the dance was held in the community hall on the edge of town, took only 15 minutes, but it felt both longer and shorter than that. They talked about small things, the weather, the ranch, Mrs. Chen's delight with her dress, easy conversation that filled the space without demanding too much. But underneath it all, Eleanor felt the weight of what they were doing, the statement they were making, the line they were crossing. As they approached the hall, they could hear music drifting out into the evening air, fiddle and guitar, someone's clear voice singing about lost love and long roads. Lanterns hung from the eaves, casting warm pools of light. People milled around outside, talking and laughing, dressed in their finest. The conversation stopped when Caleb's wagon pulled up. Eleanor felt every eye turn toward them, felt the weight of judgment and curiosity and hostility. Her hand tightened on Caleb's arm. "Steady," he murmured, too quiet for anyone else to hear. "Remember what I said. You have every right to be here." "Do I?" she whispered back. "Yes." He helped her down from the wagon, his hands gentle but sure. "And I'm right here with you, every step." They walked toward the hall entrance together, and the crowd parted like the Red Sea. Whispers followed them, some shocked, some scandalized, some simply curious. Eleanor kept her chin up and her expression serene, even though her heart was hammering so hard she thought everyone must be able to hear it. Sheriff Dawson stood by the entrance, and his face darkened when he saw them approach. "Ward," he said flatly. "Miss Blake." "Sheriff," Caleb returned, his voice pleasant but firm. "Lovely evening for a dance." "Didn't think you'd actually bring her," Dawson said, ignoring Eleanor completely. "Thought maybe you'd come to your senses." "My senses are perfectly intact, thank you." "Are they?" The sheriff's hand drifted toward his gun. Not threatening exactly, but not threatening either. "Because from where I stand, you're making a damn fool of yourself over a woman who—" "Careful," Caleb interrupted, and suddenly all the pleasantness was gone from his voice. "Very careful with your next words, Dawson. We're at a community event, families present, children. You really want to make a scene here?" The two men stared at each other, the tension thick enough to cut. Eleanor held her breath. Then Mrs. Patterson appeared in the doorway, moving surprisingly fast for her age. "Are you two going to stand here measuring yourselves all night, or are you going to let people into the dance?" she demanded. "Move aside, Tom Dawson. You're blocking the entrance." The sheriff's jaw tightened, but he stepped aside. Mrs. Patterson took Eleanor's other arm with proprietary firmness. "Come along, dear. I want you to meet some people." She shot a glare at the sheriff. "People with actual manners and Christian charity." Eleanor found herself swept into the hall before she could fully process what had happened. The interior was decorated with fall harvest themes: corn stalks and pumpkins, apples and wheat sheaves. Tables lined the walls, laden with food brought by various families. The musicians occupied a small stage at one end, and already several couples were dancing in the center of the room. It was warm and bright and festive, and for a moment Eleanor forgot all about the hostile stares and whispered comments. This was what community was supposed to feel like. This was what she'd been missing. Mrs. Patterson dragged her around the room, introducing her to people with the determination of a general deploying troops. Most of them were kind, or at least neutral, though Eleanor caught plenty of disapproving looks from the corners of the room. Mrs. Whitman stood with a cluster of other well-dressed women, all of them watching Eleanor with expressions ranging from disdain to outright hostility. But there were allies too. Mrs. Chen gave her a warm hug and thanked her again for the beautiful dress. Alice Thornton raised her glass in a subtle toast. Molly and her mother came over to chat, Molly barely able to contain her excitement about Eleanor's dress. Through it all, Caleb stayed close. Not hovering, not possessive, just present. A steady, comforting presence at her side. When the musician struck up a waltz, he turned to her with a slight bow. "Miss Blake, would you do me the honor?" Eleanor's mouth went dry. Dancing with him, here, in front of everyone, that would be the real statement, the real point of no return. She took his offered hand. "I'd be delighted, Mr. Ward." The room fell silent as they walked onto the dance floor. Not completely silent, the music continued, other couples were still moving, but quiet enough that Eleanor heard someone mutter, "Shameless," and someone else respond, "Poor Mr. Ward being taken in by that woman." Then Caleb's hand settled at her waist, warm and sure, and his other hand clasped hers, and they began to move. He was a good dancer, better than she'd expected. He led with confidence, but not arrogance, making it easy for her to follow even though her knees felt weak and her heart was racing. "Breathe," he reminded her softly. "You're doing fine." "Everyone's staring." "Let them stare." He spun her gently, and she caught a glimpse of the watching faces, some shocked, some angry, some simply fascinated by the drama of it all. "Eleanor, look at me." She did. Met those earth-brown eyes and saw nothing but warmth and certainty. "This town doesn't get to decide who you are," Caleb said quietly, his voice meant only for her. "They don't get to define you by rumors or judge you by gossip. You're here because you have every right to be here, because you're a member of this community whether they like it or not, and because—" He hesitated, then continued, "because I wanted to dance with you. Is that allowed?" Despite everything, Eleanor felt herself smile. "I suppose it is." "Good." He smiled back. "Then that's all that matters." They danced through the waltz and into the next song, a livelier tune that had them moving faster, spinning and stepping in time with the music. Other couples joined them on the floor now, the spell of silence broken. Eleanor caught glimpses of familiar faces, Molly beaming at her, Mrs. Patterson nodding approval, Alice Thornton smiling softly. And Mrs. Whitman, her face pinched with disapproval, whispering furiously to her companions. The song ended and Caleb led Eleanor off the floor, his hand at the small of her back. They just reached the refreshment table when Sheriff Dawson appeared, a glass of punch in hand and whiskey clear on his breath. "Having fun, Ward?" he asked, his words slightly slurred. "Enjoying your evening with the Denver whore?" The room didn't go silent this time, but people nearby stopped talking, stopped moving, suddenly very interested in what was happening. Eleanor felt Caleb's hand tighten at her back, felt the tension flood his body. "Walk away, Dawson," Caleb said, his voice low and dangerous. "You're drunk, and you're about to do something you'll regret." "Oh, I won't regret this." The sheriff set down his glass with exaggerated care. "Someone needs to say what everyone's thinking. That woman," he pointed at Eleanor with unsteady finger, "destroyed a family in Denver, seduced a married man, spread her legs for her employer, and then played innocent when she got caught. And now she's here, working her way into our town, into our community, trying to do the same thing all over again." "That's enough," Mrs. Patterson snapped, pushing forward through the crowd. "Is it?" Dawson swung toward her. "Is it enough, Ruth? Or should we talk about how she's already got her claws into Ward here? How she's probably planning to trap him into marriage? Get her hands on the broken spur? That's what women like her do. They destroy good men." Eleanor felt like she'd been punched. Every word was a blow, confirming her worst fears about what people thought of her. She wanted to run, to flee, to disappear into the night and never come back. But Caleb's hand was still at her back, steady and warm. And when she looked at his face, she saw not shame or embarrassment, but cold, controlled fury. "You need to shut your mouth right now," Caleb said, each word precise and hard. "Before you say something that crosses a line you can't uncross." "What line?" The sheriff laughed, bitter and ugly. "The line where I point out that you're making the same mistake my sister made? Catherine trusted you, Ward, married you, and look where that got her, 6 feet under before she turned 25. Now you're taking up with this. Don't." The single word cracked like a whip. "Don't you dare bring Catherine into this. Don't you dare use her memory as a weapon." "Why not? You killed her. Everyone knows it. You worked her to death on that ranch of yours, and when she got sick, you didn't even... Caleb moved so fast, Eleanor barely saw it. One moment he was standing beside her. The next he had the sheriff by the collar, their faces inches apart. "You listen to me, Tom Dawson, and you listen carefully," Caleb said, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the now silent room. "Catherine died of fever. The doctor confirmed it. The undertaker confirmed it. It was a tragedy, but it was an act of God, not an act of murder. And you know that. You've always known that. But you couldn't accept that sometimes bad things just happen, so you needed someone to blame. You needed me to be the villain in your story." "You are the villain," Dawson spat. "You killed my sister and now I'm what? Living my life, finding happiness again? Is that what bothers you, Tom? That 6 years later I'm not still drowning in grief? That I'm not destroying myself with guilt over something I didn't do?" Eleanor watched, heart in her throat, as the two men stared at each other. The entire hall had gone silent, everyone watching this confrontation years in the making. Then Caleb released the sheriff and took a step back. "I loved Catherine," he said, and his voice cracked slightly. "I loved her with everything I had. And when she died, I wanted to die too. I spent a year trying to drink myself to death, another year working myself to exhaustion, anything to make the pain stop. But it didn't stop, it just dulled. Eventually. And I had a choice. I could let grief destroy me, or I could try to live again. I chose to live." He turned to look at Eleanor, and his expression softened. "And if that means opening my heart to someone new, if that means finding joy again despite everything I've lost, then that's what I'm going to do. You don't get a vote in that, Tom. Catherine's been gone for 6 years. I'm sorry that you can't move past that, but I won't let your grief dictate my life anymore." The sheriff's face had gone from red to white. "I'm done," Caleb interrupted. "Done with your accusations, done with your harassment, done pretending that your pain gives you the right to hurt other people." He took Eleanor's hand. "And if you come after Eleanor again, if you threaten her, if you spread more lies about her, if you so much as look at her wrong, then we're going to have a very different kind of conversation. Are we clear?" Sheriff Dawson swayed slightly, his eyes bloodshot and filled with a decade's worth of rage and grief. For a moment, Eleanor thought he might actually throw a punch. Then someone coughed in the crowd, and he seemed to remember where he was. His hand fell away from his gun, and his shoulders slumped. "This isn't over, Ward," he muttered. "Yeah, it is." Caleb's voice was final. "It really is." The sheriff stumbled toward the door, knocking into a table on his way out. The crowd parted for him, and then he was gone, disappearing into the night. The hall erupted in whispers. Caleb turned to Eleanor, and she saw worry in his eyes. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean for—" "Don't apologize," Eleanor said firmly. She was shaking, but not from fear, from something else, something that felt almost like triumph. "Don't you dare apologize for defending yourself, for defending us." "But your reputation—" "My reputation was already ruined, remember?" She squeezed his hand. "At least now people know the truth. About Catherine. About what really happened." Mrs. Chen appeared beside them, her weathered face creased with concern. "Are you both all right?" "We're fine," Caleb assured her. "Good." Mrs. Chen's expression turned fierce. "Because Tom Dawson's been needed to hear those words for 6 years, and I'm glad someone finally said them. Catherine was a sweet girl, God rest her soul, but her death wasn't anyone's fault. Fever takes who it takes." Other people were approaching now. Mrs. Patterson, Alice Thornton, the blacksmith and his wife, even a few of the ranchers Eleanor didn't know. Not everyone. Mrs. Whitman and her circle remained conspicuously absent, huddled by the far wall with expressions of scandalized disapproval. But enough people, enough kindness to balance the hostility. "That took courage," the blacksmith said to Caleb, clapping him on the shoulder. "About time someone stood up to Dawson's bullying." "Agreed," said another rancher. "Man's been trading on his sister's death for too long. Grief's one thing, but that was just cruelty." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. Not from sadness, but from relief. From the overwhelming realization that maybe, just maybe, they had allies here. Maybe the battle wasn't already lost. The musicians, sensing that the drama had passed, struck up another song, something bright and cheerful, deliberately breaking the tension. A few couples drifted back onto the dance floor. Conversations resumed, carefully avoiding what had just happened while everyone processed it privately. Caleb looked down at Eleanor, and a slow smile spread across his face. Well, that went about as well as could be expected. You call that well? We're both still standing. The sheriff left instead of shooting anyone. I'd call that a success. He offered his hand again. Dance with me? Properly this time, without quite so much drama? Eleanor took his hand and let him lead her back onto the floor. This time, when they began to move, she didn't feel the weight of everyone's stares, didn't feel the suffocating pressure of judgment. She just felt the warmth of Caleb's hand at her waist, the strength of his arms, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat when she rested her head briefly against his shoulder. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For believing me. For standing up for me. For, she struggled to find words, for seeing me. His hand tightened at her waist. Eleanor Blake, you are the easiest person in the world to see. Anyone who doesn't isn't looking properly. They danced until the musicians took a break, until Eleanor's feet ached and her face hurt from smiling. They ate apple cake and drank cider punch and talked with people who ranged from genuinely friendly to cautiously polite. Not everyone accepted Eleanor. The disapproving contingent remained firmly disapproving, but enough people gave her a chance that she began to believe she might actually build a life here. As the evening wound down and couples began drifting toward their wagons, Caleb retrieved Eleanor's shawl and draped it around her shoulders. Ready to face the ride home? He asked. More than ready. Eleanor was exhausted, emotionally wrung out, but also strangely at peace. Tonight was eventful. That's one word for it. They walked to the wagon together, Caleb's hand warm at the small of her back. The night air was cool and crisp, full of the smell of coming autumn. Stars blazed overhead, more than Eleanor had ever seen in Denver. So many they looked like someone had spilled diamonds across black velvet. The ride back to town was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. But when Caleb helped her down from the wagon in front of the dress shop, he didn't immediately let go of her hands. Eleanor, he said softly, what I said to Dawson about opening my heart again, about finding joy, I meant that. Her breath caught. Caleb, I'm not asking for anything, he continued quickly. I know it's too soon. Know you've got your own healing to do, your own life to build. But I wanted you to know that I don't regret tonight. Not any of it. Not bringing you to the dance, not defending you, not... He paused. Not caring about you. Eleanor's heart was doing that complicated thing again, expanding and contracting and filling with something that felt dangerously close to hope. I care about you too, she admitted. More than I probably should, given that I've only known you a few weeks. Sometimes a few weeks is enough. His thumb brushed across her knuckles, gentle and questioning. Sometimes you just know. They stood there in the moonlight, hands clasped, the night settling around them like a blessing. Then Caleb released her hands and stepped back. Good night, Eleanor. Sleep well. Good night, Caleb. She watched him drive away, the wagon disappearing into the darkness. Then she climbed the stairs to her rooms, changed out of the emerald silk with careful reverence, and lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow the gossip would start fresh. Tomorrow there would be new challenges, new hostilities to navigate. Tomorrow Mrs. Whitman would probably organize another prayer circle, and the sheriff would probably find new ways to make her life difficult. But tonight she'd danced with a good man in a beautiful dress. Tonight she'd stood her ground and survived. Tonight she'd seen Caleb Ward face down his own demons to defend her honor. Tonight had been almost perfect, and that was enough to carry her into tomorrow. The morning after the dance arrived with unexpected consequences. Eleanor woke to the sound of voices outside her window, not just one or two, but several, all talking at once. She dressed quickly and came downstairs to find a small crowd gathered outside the dress shop. For a moment, her heart seized with fear. Had the sheriff organized something? Were they here to run her out of town? Then she recognized Mrs. Patterson at the front of the group, and the older woman caught sight of her through the window and waved. Eleanor unlocked the door with trembling hands. Good morning, Miss Blake, Mrs. Patterson said cheerfully. Hope we didn't wake you, but word travels fast in Willow Creek, and half these ladies want to commission work from you before the other half gets here. Eleanor stared at the assembled women. Some she recognized from the dance, Mrs. Chen, Alice Thornton, Molly's mother. Others were strangers, ranch wives who rarely came to town. All of them looked at her with expressions ranging from friendly curiosity to cautious respect. I don't understand, Eleanor managed. You made quite an impression last night, Alice Thornton explained, stepping forward. That dress you wore? Every woman in the hall was talking about it. The craftsmanship, the style, the way it moved. And when Mrs. Chen showed us her birthday dress from Mr. Ward, well, she smiled. Let's just say we'd all like to look that elegant. But I thought, after what happened with the sheriff made a fool of himself, Mrs. Patterson interrupted firmly. Got drunk, insulted a lady, and aired 6 years of dirty laundry in front of the whole town. Most folks are feeling pretty disgusted with Tom Dawson this morning, truth be told. And impressed with Mr. Ward, added another woman, one Eleanor didn't recognize. Takes courage to stand up to a man with a badge and a grudge. My husband said he's never seen anyone handle Dawson that well. Eleanor felt dizzy with the sudden reversal. Yesterday she'd been the town pariah. Today she had customers lined up outside her door. I'd be honored to take your commissions, she said, stepping back to let them enter. Please, come in. Let me get my notebook. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of measurements and fabric discussions and style consultations. By the time the last woman left, Eleanor had more work than she could possibly complete in a month. Molly arrived for her regular shift and literally gasped when she saw the stack of orders. Miss Blake, this is amazing! This is terrifying, Eleanor corrected, but she was smiling. How am I going to finish all of this? We'll manage, Molly said with the confidence of youth. I'll take on more hours, and maybe we can find another girl to help with the simpler work, hems and basic alterations. It was a good plan, a sensible plan. Eleanor threw herself into the work with renewed energy, grateful to have something productive to focus on besides her complicated feelings about Caleb Ward. 3 days passed before she saw him again. She was cutting fabric at the main table, Molly working on hems in the corner, when the door opened and Caleb stepped inside. He looked tired, she noticed, lines of strain around his eyes that hadn't been there at the dance. Caleb, she greeted him, setting down her scissors. Is everything all right? Fine. Well, mostly fine. He removed his hat, turning it in his hands, a nervous gesture she'd never seen from him before. I came to check on you, see how you're holding up after the other night. I'm well. Better than well, actually. She gestured at the organized chaos of the shop. Apparently, creating a scandal is good for business. That drew a small smile from him. I heard you've been swamped with orders, Mrs. Chen said half the ranch wives in the territory are talking about the dressmaker in Willow Creek. It's overwhelming but wonderful. Eleanor paused, really looking at him. But you didn't come here to talk about my business success. What's wrong? Caleb glanced at Molly, who was doing a terrible job of pretending not to listen. Could we speak privately? Eleanor's stomach clenched, but she nodded. Molly, would you mind watching the front for a few minutes? Of course, Miss Blake. Molly was practically vibrating with curiosity, but she kept her expression professional. Eleanor led Caleb to the back room where she kept supplies and did her cutting work. The space was small, made smaller by Caleb's presence. She could smell leather and sage and the faint tang of horse, scents that were becoming dangerously familiar. What happened? She asked quietly. Caleb set his hat on the cutting table and ran a hand through his hair. The sheriff's been making noise, talking about conducting an investigation into your background, bringing in someone from Denver to testify about what really happened with the Montgomery family. Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. He can't do that. He has no authority to... He's the sheriff, Caleb interrupted gently. He can do pretty much whatever he wants, especially if he convinces the town council that you're a threat to public morals or some such nonsense. So what do I do? Eleanor heard the panic in her own voice and hated it. Do I leave? Run before he can... No. Caleb's hand caught hers, warm and solid. You don't run. Not this time. But if he brings someone from Denver, if they testify that then we'll deal with it. Together. His eyes were fierce. Eleanor, I meant what I said at the dance. I'm not abandoning you to face this alone. This isn't your fight, she protested weakly. Like hell it isn't. He squeezed her hand gently. Dawson's using you to get at me. This is absolutely my fight. Eleanor wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he'd already done enough, but the words wouldn't come. Because the truth was, she didn't want to face this alone, didn't want to run again, didn't want to lose the fragile life she'd started building here. What do we do? She asked instead. We wait, Caleb said. We go about our business. We don't give Dawson the satisfaction of seeing us scared, and, he hesitated, we prepare for the worst. Which is that someone from Denver actually comes. Someone who knew the Montgomerys, who heard their version of events. When that happens, you're going to have to tell your story, publicly. In front of the town council, probably, or Judge Wilson if it comes to that. The thought made Eleanor's stomach turn over. I can't. You can, Caleb corrected. You're the strongest person I know, Eleanor Blake. You survived scandal in Denver, you came west alone, you stood up to a sheriff with a gun, and you built a business from nothing in a hostile town. You can do this too. You have entirely too much faith in me. I have exactly the right amount of faith in you. He released her hand, but his eyes stayed locked on hers. And when the time comes, I'll be right there beside you. You won't face this alone. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back furiously. Why? Why are you doing all this for me? Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Because when Catherine died, this town turned on me. Made up stories, spread rumors, treated me like a criminal. And I had no one. No one who believed me, no one who stood beside me. I was completely alone, and it nearly destroyed me. His voice roughened. I won't let that happen to you. I won't let you face that kind of isolation if I can help it. That's not the only reason, Eleanor said softly. It wasn't a question. No, he admitted. It's not. The air between them felt charged, heavy with things unsaid. Eleanor's heart was racing, her breath coming short. Caleb took a half step closer, and she could see the gold flecks in his brown eyes, the faint scar along his jaw, the way his gaze dropped to her mouth for just a moment before returning to her eyes. Eleanor, he began, his voice rough. The door to the front room banged open, and Molly's voice called out, Miss Blake, Mrs. Whitman is here to see you. Eleanor and Caleb sprang apart like guilty teenagers. Eleanor pressed a hand to her racing heart and tried to compose herself. Mrs. Whitman? She called back, confused. The banker's wife had been one of her most vocal critics. Yes, ma'am, and she seems pretty insistent. Eleanor exchanged a glance with Caleb, who looked as puzzled as she felt. Together they returned to the main room. Mrs. Whitman stood by the cutting table, her posture rigid with displeasure. She wore an expensive dress in deep purple, last year's fashion from San Francisco, Eleanor noted automatically, and her face was set in lines of aristocratic disdain. Mrs. Whitman, Eleanor greeted her carefully. How can I help you? Miss Blake. The woman's eyes flicked to Caleb, and something almost like satisfaction crossed her face. Mr. Ward, how convenient that you're both here. Amelia, Caleb said, his voice cool, if you've come to cause trouble... I've come to offer Miss Blake an opportunity, Mrs. Whitman interrupted. Though given the company she keeps, I'm not certain she deserves it. Eleanor felt her spine stiffen. I'm listening. Mrs. Whitman's smile was thin and sharp. My daughter is getting married in 6 weeks. She needs a wedding dress, something elegant and fashionable. I'd planned to order from San Francisco, but the dress she wanted won't arrive in time. She paused, clearly enjoying the moment. I've been told you're a skilled seamstress. I'd like to commission you to make Margaret's wedding dress. Eleanor stared at her, searching for the trap. Because there had to be a trap. Mrs. Whitman had spent weeks making her disapproval clear. That's very generous, Eleanor said carefully. But I have to ask, why come to me? You've made your opinion of me quite clear. My opinion of you hasn't changed, Mrs. Whitman said bluntly. "I still think you're a woman of questionable morals who's brought scandal to our town. However," she held up a hand when Caleb started to protest, "I've seen your work. That dress you wore to the harvest dance was exquisite, and my daughter deserves the best for her wedding day, regardless of my personal feelings about the seamstress." It was perhaps the most backhanded compliment Eleanor had ever received, but it was also an opportunity, a chance to create something truly special, to prove her worth in a way that couldn't be denied. "I'd be honored to make your daughter's dress," Eleanor said. "When can I meet with her to discuss what she wants?" "Tomorrow afternoon, 2 o'clock?" Mrs. Whitman's expression remained frosty. "And Miss Blake? This dress needs to be perfect. Margaret's marrying the governor's nephew. Half the territory will be at that wedding. If you embarrass my family—" "The dress will be perfect," Eleanor interrupted firmly. "You have my word." Mrs. Whitman studied her for a long moment, then nodded curtly. "Very well. Margaret will come by tomorrow. Good day." She swept out, leaving a wake of expensive perfume and barely concealed hostility. "Well," Molly said into the silence, "that was unexpected." "That was a test," Caleb corrected grimly. "Amelia Whitman doesn't do anything without calculation. She's setting you up, Eleanor." "Setting me up how?" "Think about it. The governor's nephew's wedding, half the territory attending. If the dress is anything less than absolutely perfect, you'll be ruined. Every influential person in Montana will hear about the scandal-plagued dressmaker who couldn't deliver." He shook his head. "And if you refuse the commission, she'll spread it around that you're not confident in your own abilities." Eleanor saw the trap now, closing from both sides. Accept and risk public failure, or decline and confirm everyone's worst suspicions about her competence. "Then I'll have to make sure the dress is perfect," she said quietly. "Eleanor, what choice do I have, Caleb?" She met his eyes steadily. "Turn down the biggest commission of my life because I'm afraid? That's not the woman you said I was. That's not the woman I want to be." He studied her face, and slowly his expression shifted from concern to something like admiration. "You're right. I'm sorry. I just worry." "I know," Eleanor's voice softened, "and I'm grateful. But I can do this. I will do this." Molly, who'd been watching the whole exchange with bright eyes, cleared her throat. "For what it's worth, Miss Blake, I think you're absolutely going to create the most beautiful wedding dress this territory has ever seen, and then Mrs. Whitman will have to eat every nasty word she's ever said about you." Eleanor couldn't help but smile. "From your mouth to God's ears, Molly." Caleb lingered after Molly went back to her hemming, clearly wanting to say more but uncertain how to begin. Finally, he just said, "Be careful, Eleanor. Amelia Whitman is dangerous in ways that have nothing to do with sheriffs and guns. She destroys people with words and social pressure. Don't underestimate her." "I won't," Eleanor promised. "I've dealt with women like her before." "And how did that work out?" The question was gentle but pointed. Eleanor thought about Mrs. Montgomery, about the whisper campaign that had destroyed her life in Denver. "Not well," she admitted. "But I'm not the same person I was then. I'm stronger now. I have allies now. I have—" She stopped herself before she said "you." But Caleb heard it anyway. His expression softened. "Yes," he said quietly. "You have me, for whatever that's worth." "It's worth everything," Eleanor whispered. They stood there, the moment stretching between them, full of possibility and promise and all the complications that came with caring for someone in a world determined to keep them apart. Then Caleb settled his hat back on his head and stepped toward the door. "I should let you get back to work. But Eleanor, if you need anything at all, send word to the ranch." "I will." After he left, Molly abandoned all pretense of working and came to stand beside Eleanor at the window, watching Caleb ride away. "You love him," Molly said. "Not a question." "I barely know him," Eleanor protested. "That's not what I said." Molly's expression was far too knowing for a 16-year-old. "You love him, and he loves you. Everyone can see it." "Everyone can see that we're causing a scandal," Eleanor corrected. "That's not the same thing." "Isn't it, though?" Molly tilted her head. "Sometimes the most scandalous thing is just two people choosing each other despite what everyone else thinks.
That's pretty much the definition of love, if you ask me. Eleanor wanted to argue, but the words stuck in her throat. Because Molly was right. She did love Caleb Ward, his strength and kindness, his quiet courage, the way he saw her as a whole person rather than a collection of rumors. She loved him, and it terrified her because loving someone meant giving them the power to hurt you, and Eleanor had been hurt enough. But before she could spiral too far into her fears, the shop door opened again and Margaret Whitman herself stepped inside, 2 full days early for their appointment. The girl was lovely, perhaps 19, with her mother's aristocratic features softened by youth and genuine sweetness.
She wore a simple day dress in pale blue, and her expression was anxious rather than haughty. "Miss Blake?" she asked hesitantly. "I know I'm not supposed to come until tomorrow, but I couldn't wait. Mother doesn't know I'm here. She thinks I'm at the mercantile. But I had to talk to you." Eleanor's guard went up immediately. "Of course. What can I do for you?" Margaret glanced at Molly, then back at Eleanor. "Could we speak privately? Please? It's rather important." Eleanor led her to the back room, that same small space where she'd stood with Caleb just an hour before. Margaret closed the door carefully and turned to face her, fingers twisting in her skirt. "Miss Blake, I need you to understand something. I want you to make my wedding dress. Truly. I saw what you wore to the harvest dance, and it was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, but—" She took a breath. "My mother has other plans." Eleanor's stomach sank. "What kind of plans?" "She's going to sabotage you," Margaret said in a rush. "She's going to come to fittings and demand impossible changes. She's going to criticize everything you do, no matter how perfect it is. And then, at the wedding, she's going to make sure everyone knows about every tiny imperfection, every place where the dress isn't exactly what she claimed she asked for, even though she never actually asked for those things." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because it's not fair." Margaret's eyes shone with tears. "You don't deserve what Mother's planning. You didn't do anything wrong in Denver. I heard the real story from Alice Thornton, whose cousin worked for the Montgomerys. Mrs. Montgomery's husband was a predator, and you were his victim, not his seductress. But Mother doesn't care about truth. She only cares about maintaining her position in society, and she sees you as a threat." Eleanor felt like she'd been punched. "A threat? How could I possibly—" "Because people like you," Margaret interrupted. "Because you're talented and beautiful and Mr. Ward is courting you, and that makes you dangerous to women like my mother who've spent their whole lives controlling everything through fear and judgment." She wiped her eyes angrily. "I'm sorry. I know she's my mother, and I should be loyal, but I'm so tired of her cruelty, tired of watching her destroy people just because she can." Eleanor studied the girl's face, young and earnest and clearly struggling with divided loyalties. This could be another trap, she thought, another way to manipulate her. But her instinct said otherwise. Margaret seemed genuinely distressed, genuinely trying to help. "What do you want me to do?" Eleanor asked gently. "Make the dress," Margaret said immediately. "Make it exactly as I ask, not as Mother demands. I'll write down everything I want, measurements, style, fabric, everything, and sign it. That way, when Mother claims you didn't follow her instructions, you'll have proof that you followed mine." She pulled a folded paper from her pocket. "I already started. See?" Eleanor unfolded the paper and found detailed sketches and notes in a neat, careful hand. The dress Margaret wanted was elegant but not ostentatious, romantic but not frivolous. It was perfect. "This is beautiful," Eleanor breathed. "It's what I've been dreaming about since I got engaged," Margaret said. "And I want you to make it, Miss Blake, not some stranger in San Francisco who'll just follow a pattern. I want someone who'll put love and care into every stitch." She paused. "Will you do it? Even knowing what Mother's planning?" Eleanor looked at the sketches, at Margaret's hopeful face, at the detailed notes that showed real thought and care. This was more than just a commission. This was a young woman asking to be seen, to have her own desires respected, to matter more than her mother's machinations. "Yes," Eleanor said firmly. "I'll make your dress, Margaret, and it's going to be the most beautiful wedding dress anyone in Montana has ever seen." Margaret's face lit up like sunrise. "Thank you. Oh, thank you." She impulsively hugged Eleanor, then stepped back blushing. "I'm
I'm sorry. That was forward of me. It was perfectly appropriate, Eleanor assured her, smiling. Now, let's get your measurements properly taken, and we can start planning this dress. They spent the next hour in detailed consultation, with Molly taking notes and offering suggestions. Margaret proved to have excellent taste and a clear vision of what she wanted. By the time she left, sneaking out like a conspirator, which she essentially was, Eleanor had everything she needed to begin work. Molly was practically bouncing with excitement. Did you hear that? Mrs. Whitman's daughter is on your side. This is like something from a novel. This is like something from a nightmare, Eleanor corrected, but she was smiling. If Mrs. Whitman finds out that Margaret came here behind her back, then we'll deal with it, Molly said, unconsciously echoing Caleb's earlier words. But Miss Blake, don't you see? This is your chance to prove yourself in a way that can't be denied. Make that dress perfect, and not even Mrs. Whitman will be able to tear you down. Eleanor wanted to believe that talent and hard work could overcome social prejudice and entrenched hostility, but she'd believed that once before in Denver, and look how that had turned out. Still, what choice did she have? She'd already accepted the commission, already promised Margaret she'd create something beautiful. All she could do now was keep that promise and hope for the best. The next 6 weeks became a blur of work and worry. Eleanor threw herself into Margaret's wedding dress with single-minded focus, determined to create something truly spectacular. The fabric alone cost more than she usually spent in a month. White silk so fine it felt like water, with delicate lace from France that Mrs. Whitman had grudgingly provided. Eleanor worked late into the night, her fingers cramping from the tiny, precise stitches required for such delicate material. Caleb came by when he could, always with some excuse, picking up a commissioned shirt for one of his ranch hands, asking about getting curtains made for the bunkhouse, wondering if Eleanor knew anyone who could mend his good coat. Eleanor saw through every excuse and treasured each visit anyway. They talked about small things and large things, about his ranch and her business, about their pasts and their hopes for the future. Each conversation felt like laying down roots, building something that might last. But they were careful. No more almost kisses in the back room. No public displays that could fuel more gossip. They were both aware that Eleanor's position in Willow Creek remained precarious, balanced on the knife's edge of the town's tolerance. That tolerance was tested when Sheriff Dawson made good on his threat. Eleanor was working on the intricate beadwork for Margaret's bodice when Molly burst through the door, breathless and wide-eyed. Miss Blake, there's a man at the hotel from Denver. He's been asking questions about you. Eleanor's hand stilled on the silk. What kind of man? I don't know his name, but Mrs. Patterson says he's a lawyer, arrived on this morning's stage and went straight to see the sheriff. Molly's face was pale. Everyone's saying he's here to testify about what happened with the Montgomery family. This was it then. The confrontation Eleanor had been dreading. She set down her needlework with hands that wanted to shake but refused to let them. All right, she said, more calmly than she felt. Then I suppose I'll have to face him. You don't have to do this alone, Molly insisted. Let me get Mr. Ward or Mrs. Patterson, or no. Eleanor stood, smoothing her skirt with deliberate care. I need to handle this myself first. If it goes badly, then I'll ask for help. But I won't hide behind other people. Not anymore. She walked to the hotel with her head high and her heart hammering. The building was the largest in Willow Creek, 3 stories of whitewashed wood with a broad porch where old men liked to sit and watch the world go by. Today, those old men watched Eleanor approach with expressions of mingled curiosity and concern. Inside the lobby was dim and cool. Behind the desk, Mr. Peterson, Molly's father, gave her a sympathetic nod. He's in the dining room, Miss Blake, with the sheriff and Judge Wilson. Judge Wilson's presence was actually reassuring. The judge was fair-minded, known for listening to both sides before making decisions. If he was here, this might actually be an official hearing rather than just a lynch mob. Eleanor found them at a corner table. Sheriff Dawson looking smug, Judge Wilson looking weary, and a stranger in an expensive suit looking calculating. The stranger was perhaps 40, with thinning hair and the kind of face that would be instantly forgettable, if not for the cold intelligence in his eyes. All 3 men looked up when Eleanor entered. Ah,
the stranger said, rising with exaggerated courtesy. "You must be Miss Eleanor Blake. I'm Warren Sutter, attorney at law from Denver." Eleanor's blood ran cold. Sutter, she knew that name. He was Mr. Montgomery's personal lawyer, the man who'd helped spread the lies that destroyed her reputation. "Mr. Sutter," she acknowledged, keeping her voice level. "I assume you're here about the Montgomery matter." "Indeed I am." His smile was sharp and unpleasant. "Sheriff Dawson was kind enough to contact me regarding your presence in Willow Creek. He felt the community should be informed about your history before you could cause any more damage." "I haven't caused any damage," Eleanor said firmly. "I run a legitimate business, and I bother no one." "Is that so?" Sutter pulled a sheaf of papers from his briefcase. "Because I have here sworn statements from Mr. and Mrs. Montgomery describing how you seduced Mr. Montgomery over a period of months, how you attempted to extort money from him when he tried to end the affair, and how you threatened Mrs. Montgomery when she discovered your relationship with her husband." Every word was a lie, and Eleanor felt rage building in her chest, but she forced herself to remain calm, to think rather than just react. "Those statements are false," she said clearly, "and I'm prepared to tell the truth about what really happened, if Judge Wilson would like to hear it." Judge Wilson, who'd been watching the exchange with hooded eyes, nodded slowly. "I think that would be appropriate. Miss Blake, please sit down." Eleanor sat, folding her hands in her lap to hide their trembling. Sheriff Dawson leaned back in his chair with a satisfied smile, clearly expecting her to be eviscerated by whatever Sutter had prepared. But before Sutter could begin his questioning, the dining room door opened again and Caleb Ward stepped through, followed by Mrs. Patterson, Mrs. Chen, Alice Thornton, and half a dozen other women Eleanor recognized from her customer list. "Heard there was some kind of hearing happening," Caleb said mildly, though his eyes were hard. "Thought we should attend. Public interest and all." Judge Wilson's mouth twitched in what might have been amusement. "This isn't exactly a formal proceeding, Mr. Ward." "Then you won't mind if we observe informally," Mrs. Patterson said, settling herself at a nearby table with the determination of a general claiming strategic ground. "Seems to me that if Miss Blake's reputation is being discussed, she should have some friends present." Sheriff Dawson's face darkened. "This is official business." "No, Tom, it's not," Judge Wilson interrupted. "You brought Mr. Sutter here to make accusations. The least we can do is allow Miss Blake the courtesy of having witnesses to her defense." He turned to Eleanor. "Unless you'd prefer privacy?" Eleanor looked at Caleb, at the assembled women who'd taken time from their busy days to support her, and felt something warm bloom in her chest. "I'd like them to stay," she said. "I have nothing to hide." "Very well." Judge Wilson gestured to Sutter. "Mr. Sutter, you may present your case." What followed was one of the most difficult hours of Eleanor's life. Sutter read from the Montgomery statements, painting her as a calculating seductress who'd preyed on a wealthy, vulnerable man. He described supposed romantic meetings, alleged love letters, claimed incidents of inappropriate behavior that had never happened. Through it all, Eleanor sat with her spine straight and her hands folded, letting him finish before she responded. When Sutter finally sat down, looking pleased with himself, Judge Wilson turned to her. "Miss Blake, your response." Eleanor took a deep breath and began to speak. She told them everything, about Mr. Montgomery's advances, about her repeated refusals, about the day Mrs. Montgomery had walked in to find her husband forcing himself on Eleanor while she tried to push him away. She described Mrs. Montgomery's screams, Mr. Montgomery's quick lies, the way the entire household had turned against her overnight. "I had no affair with Mr. Montgomery," she said, her voice steady and clear. "I was his employee, nothing more. But when I rejected his advances, he decided to destroy my reputation rather than accept responsibility for his own behavior. And Mr. Sutter," she turned to look at the lawyer directly, "you helped him do it. You knew the truth. You were there the day Mrs. Montgomery confronted me. You heard her accuse her husband of attempted assault, but you helped them twist the story, helped them make me the villain instead of the victim." Sutter's face went red. "That's a damned lie." "Is it?" Eleanor pulled a folded paper from her pocket, the letter she'd carried with her from Denver, the one piece of evidence she'd managed to save.
This is a letter from Mrs. Montgomery's personal maid, Anna Chen. She witnessed the whole incident. She wrote this letter to me 3 days after I was dismissed, apologizing for not speaking up, but saying she was too afraid of losing her position. She handed the letter to Judge Wilson, who read it with increasing interest.
Mrs. Chen confirms Miss Blake's account, the judge said slowly. She states clearly that Mr. Montgomery was forcing his attentions on Miss Blake, and that Miss Blake was attempting to escape when Mrs. Montgomery entered the room. That letter could be forged, Sutter blustered. Could be, Judge Wilson agreed. But I notice you haven't denied Miss Blake's claim that you were present during Mrs. Montgomery's confrontation with her husband. Were you there, Mr. Sutter? Sutter's jaw worked. I was present in the household that day, yes, but... And did you hear Mrs. Montgomery accuse her husband of assault? Silence. Thick and damning. Finally, Sutter said, I heard many things said in anger that day. I can't be expected to remember every... So you did hear it, Caleb interrupted from his table. You heard Mrs. Montgomery accuse her husband, and you helped him cover it up anyway. I helped my client manage an unfortunate situation. You helped a predator destroy an innocent woman's life, Mrs. Patterson snapped, and now you're here trying to do it again. Judge Wilson held up a hand for silence. Miss Blake, is there anyone else who can corroborate your story? Anyone from Denver who might have witnessed Mr. Montgomery's behavior? Eleanor's heart sank. Anna Chen left the Montgomery household shortly after I did. I don't know where she went. The other servants, they were all dependent on the Montgomerys for their livelihood. They wouldn't risk speaking against them. So it's your word against theirs, Sheriff Dawson said triumphantly. No, a new voice said from the doorway. It's her word and mine against theirs. Everyone turned to see Mrs. Chen, not Anna Chen from Denver, but Mrs. Chen from the Broken Spur, standing in the entrance. Her weathered face was set in determined lines. Anna Chen is my niece, she said, walking into the room. She wrote to me after Miss Blake was dismissed, told me the whole story, told me how guilty she felt for not speaking up, how the Montgomerys threatened to ruin anyone who didn't support their version of events. She looked at Eleanor with sympathy. Anna was terrified, Miss Blake. She was just 18 years old and alone in Denver, but she wanted you to know the truth. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. I never blamed her. I understood. I know you did. Anna said you were the kindest person in that household, the only one who treated the servants like human beings rather than furniture. Mrs. Chen turned to Judge Wilson. My niece's letter to Miss Blake wasn't forged. Anna sent me a copy as well. I can provide it if needed. Judge Wilson nodded slowly. I think that would be wise, Mrs. Chen. Sutter was sweating now, his composure cracking. This is highly irregular. You can't just accept hearsay and letters as evidence. I can accept whatever evidence I deem relevant, Judge Wilson interrupted. This isn't a court of law, Mr. Sutter. This is a community trying to determine the character of one of its members. And so far, I'm finding Miss Blake's account considerably more credible than yours. He stood, gathering his papers. Here's my determination. Miss Blake came to Willow Creek with a cloud over her reputation. That much is undeniable. However, she's conducted herself with dignity and integrity since her arrival. She's established a legitimate business, contributed to our community, and caused no trouble whatsoever. The accusations against her appear to be, at minimum, highly questionable, and at maximum, completely false. He turned to Sheriff Dawson. Tom, you brought Mr. Sutter here hoping to run Miss Blake out of town. Instead, you've given her a chance to clear her name publicly. I'm ruling that Miss Blake is welcome in Willow Creek and should be treated as any other respectable businesswoman would be. Anyone who continues to harass her will answer to me. Is that clear? The sheriff's face was purple with rage, but he nodded stiffly. Mr. Sutter, I suggest you return to Denver and inform the Montgomerys that their lies won't be tolerated here. If they attempt any further harassment of Miss Blake, I'll personally file charges for defamation. Sutter gathered his papers with jerky, angry movements and stalked out without another word. After a moment, Sheriff Dawson followed, leaving Eleanor alone with Judge Wilson and her supporters. The room erupted. Mrs. Patterson stood and started clapping, and soon the other women joined in. Eleanor sat there, stunned, tears streaming down her face as the reality of what had just happened sank in. She'd done it. She'd faced her accusers and told her truth, and people had believed her. Caleb was beside her suddenly, his hand warm on her shoulder. "You did it," he said softly, echoing her thoughts. "You were so brave, Eleanor." "I was terrified," she admitted. "That's what made it brave." He helped her to her feet, and she found herself surrounded by women offering congratulations, support, kind words. Mrs. Chen hugged her tightly, whispering that Anna would be so proud. Mrs. Patterson declared that anyone who still doubted Eleanor's character was an idiot. Even Judge Wilson paused to shake her hand and tell her she'd acquitted herself admirably. Through it all, Eleanor kept crying, not from sadness or fear, but from overwhelming relief. The weight she'd been carrying for months, the constant fear of being discovered and condemned, had finally lifted. She was free. When the crowd finally dispersed, Caleb walked her back to the dress shop. They moved slowly, neither wanting to break the spell of the afternoon. "Thank you," Eleanor said when they reached her door, "for coming, for bringing the others. I don't think I could have faced Sutter alone." "You could have," Caleb corrected gently. "But you didn't have to. That's the difference." He paused, then added, "Eleanor, what I said at the dance about caring for you, that hasn't changed. It's only gotten stronger." Eleanor's heart started that complicated dance again. "Caleb, you don't have to say anything now," he interrupted. "I know you need time. Know you're still building your life here, still healing from everything that happened. But I want you to know, when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'll be here, waiting." He tipped his hat and walked away, leaving Eleanor standing in the doorway with her heart full and her mind spinning. She was free. The past no longer had power over her, and the future was suddenly full of possibilities she'd never dared to imagine. Inside, Margaret Whitman's wedding dress waited, half-finished and beautiful. Eleanor returned to her work with renewed energy, her stitches sure and steady. In 3 weeks, that dress would be complete. And maybe, just maybe, it would be the final proof that Eleanor Blake belonged in Willow Creek, that she'd finally found home. The days following the confrontation with Warren Sutter brought a shift in Willow Creek's atmosphere that Eleanor could feel in her bones. Where once people had crossed the street to avoid her, now they nodded politely when they passed. Where once conversations had stopped when she entered the mercantile, now shopkeepers greeted her by name and asked about her business. It wasn't universal acceptance. Mrs. Whitman's circle still maintained their chilly distance, and Sheriff Dawson glared daggers whenever their paths crossed. But it was progress. Real, tangible progress. Eleanor threw herself into Margaret's wedding dress with the focus of someone who understood that this final test would either cement her place in the community or undo everything Judge Wilson's ruling had accomplished. The dress was taking shape beautifully, each stitch a small prayer, each seam a promise kept. The white silk caught the light like fresh snow, and the French lace formed delicate patterns across the bodice that looked like frozen flowers. It was, without question, the finest work Eleanor had ever done. Molly arrived each morning bursting with news from around town. The Peterson family seemed to have appointed themselves Eleanor's unofficial information network, and Molly took her role as messenger with endearing seriousness. "Mrs. Patterson told Ma that the Ladies' Aid Society is considering inviting you to join," Molly reported one morning, her eyes bright with excitement. "That's a big deal, Miss Blake. They only ask respectable women." "I'm not sure I'm ready for the Ladies' Aid Society," Eleanor said, though she couldn't quite hide her smile. "I have enough on my plate with this dress." "Speaking of which," Molly peered at the bodice Eleanor was beating, "that's absolutely stunning. Margaret's going to cry when she sees it. Let's hope her mother doesn't find a reason to criticize it." As if summoned by the mention of her name, the shop door opened and Mrs. Whitman herself stepped inside. Eleanor's hand stilled on the silk, her stomach tightening with familiar anxiety. "Miss Blake," Mrs. Whitman said, her voice neutral, "I've come to check on Margaret's dress." "Of course." Eleanor carefully set down her work and retrieved the dress form where the partially completed gown was displayed. She'd been dreading this moment,
knowing Mrs. Whitman would be looking for any excuse to find fault. Mrs. Whitman circled the dress slowly, her expression unreadable. She examined the seams, tested the drape of the fabric, studied the intricate beadwork. The silence stretched until Eleanor's nerves felt ready to snap. Finally, Mrs. Whitman spoke. "This is exceptional work." Eleanor blinked, certain she'd misheard. "I'm sorry?" "The craftsmanship is exceptional," Mrs. Whitman repeated, though the words seemed to pain her. "Better than anything I could have ordered from San Francisco. Margaret will be pleased." It wasn't exactly warm praise, but coming from Amelia Whitman, it might as well have been a standing ovation. Eleanor felt her shoulders relax slightly. "Thank you, Mrs. Whitman. I'm doing my best to make it perfect for Margaret's special day." "Yes, well," Mrs. Whitman smoothed her already perfect skirt. "I suppose I should also tell you that Judge Wilson's ruling the other day was appropriate. I may not approve of your presence in Willow Creek, Miss Blake, but it seems you were treated unjustly in Denver. That lawyer, Sutter, was quite obviously lying." Eleanor stared at her, shocked into momentary silence. Was this an apology from Amelia Whitman? "I appreciate you saying that," Eleanor managed. Mrs. Whitman's expression remained frosty. "Don't mistake my acknowledgement of facts for friendship, Miss Blake. I still believe you've brought scandal to our town through your association with Mr. Ward. A respectable woman would have declined his attentions until her reputation was fully restored." There it was, the barb Eleanor had been waiting for. "With respect, Mrs. Whitman, Mr. Ward's attentions are his to give, and mine to accept or decline as I see fit. My reputation, or lack thereof, doesn't obligate me to live as a nun." Mrs. Whitman's eyebrows rose nearly to her hairline. "How very forward of you to say so." "How very honest of me to say so," Eleanor corrected gently. "I've spent months being punished for things I didn't do, Mrs. Whitman. I'm done apologizing for choices that harm no one and make me happy." For a long moment, the two women stared at each other. Then, unexpectedly, Mrs. Whitman's mouth twitched in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "Margaret said you had spine," she said. "I'm beginning to see what she meant." She turned toward the door, then paused. "The dress will be ready for the final fitting in 2 weeks?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good. See that it is." After she left, Molly emerged from the back room where she'd been conspicuously absent during the entire exchange. "Did Mrs. Whitman just almost compliment you?" Molly asked, wide-eyed. "I think she did," Eleanor said, still slightly stunned. "And then she insulted me, and then she almost smiled. I'm not sure what just happened." "Progress happened," Molly declared. "Slow, grudging, painful progress, but progress nonetheless." The girl was right. Life in Willow Creek was becoming, if not easy, then at least manageable. Eleanor found a rhythm to her days, early mornings working on Margaret's dress, afternoons taking appointments with other clients, evenings reviewing accounts, and planning for the future. She hired a second girl, Sarah Mitchell, to help with basic alterations, which freed Molly to work on more complex projects. The shop was thriving in ways Eleanor had barely dared to hope for, and through it all, Caleb remained a constant presence. Not overwhelming, not demanding, just steadily there. He came by the shop several times a week, always with some excuse but really just to see her, to talk, to share the small moments of life that built connection. He brought her wildflowers from the ranch, claiming Mrs. Chen had picked them and insisted they be delivered. He commissioned shirts he didn't need and curtains for windows that already had curtains, spending his money just to spend time with her. Eleanor knew what he was doing, courting her in the slow, patient way of a man who understood she'd been wounded and needed time to heal. And despite her best efforts to maintain emotional distance, she found herself falling deeper in love with him every day. One evening, as autumn began painting the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Caleb arrived just as Eleanor was closing the shop. He wore his good shirt and had clearly made an effort with his appearance. "Evening," he said, removing his hat. "I was wondering if you might join me for supper. There's a new restaurant opened by the hotel, Mrs. Garcia's place. I hear the enchiladas are excellent." Eleanor hesitated, her hand on the door key. Supper together in a public restaurant. That was another statement, another step into the light of public scrutiny. "Everyone will talk," she said. They're already talking, Caleb pointed out. Might as well give them something worth discussing. Eleanor looked at his hopeful expression, at the way he held his hat in both hands like a nervous schoolboy, and felt her resistance crumble. "I'd love to join you for supper," she said. "Let me just grab my shawl." Mrs. Garcia's restaurant was warm and bright, filled with the scent of spices and cooking meat. The proprietor herself, a formidable woman with kind eyes and flour on her apron, seated them at a corner table and promised to bring them the house specialties. As they waited for their food, Caleb told her about the ranch, about a new foal that had been born that morning, about the preparations for winter, about his plans to expand the cattle operation in the spring. Eleanor found herself relaxing into the conversation, enjoying the normalcy of it, the simple pleasure of sharing a meal with someone she cared about. "How's the wedding dress coming?" Caleb asked as Mrs. Garcia delivered steaming plates of food. "It's nearly finished. Just the final details left, some beading on the train, the buttons for the back. Margaret's final fitting is next week." "And you're not nervous?" Eleanor laughed. "I'm terrified. This dress could make or break my reputation in Willow Creek. If it's anything less than perfect—" "It'll be perfect," Caleb interrupted gently. "I've seen your work, Eleanor. You're an artist. That dress is going to be spectacular, and everyone's going to know it." "I hope you're right." "I am right." He reached across the table and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. "You know what I admire most about you?" Eleanor's breath caught. "What?" "Your courage. You've been knocked down so many times, but you keep getting back up, keep trying, keep hoping. That takes strength most people don't have." "I don't feel strong," Eleanor admitted. "Most days I feel like I'm barely holding myself together." "That's what strength looks like," Caleb said. "It's not about never being scared. It's about being scared and doing the hard thing anyway." They finished their meal in comfortable conversation, and Caleb walked her home through the cool evening air. The streets were quiet, most families already settled in for the night. Lamplight glowed in windows, and somewhere a dog barked at the rising moon. When they reached the dress shop, Caleb didn't immediately say goodbye. Instead, he stood there in the moonlight, looking at her with an expression that made Eleanor's heart race. "Eleanor," he began, then stopped, seeming to reconsider his words. "I know I said I'd wait until you were ready. No, I promised not to push. But I need to tell you something." "All right," Eleanor whispered. "I'm in love with you." The words were simple, direct, devastating in their honesty. "I've been in love with you since you stood in that street with a bullet hole in the wall behind your head and didn't flinch. Since you looked at me with those green eyes and decided to trust me even though you had no reason to. I love your strength and your kindness and the way you see the best in people even when they don't deserve it." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. "Caleb, you don't have to say anything back," he continued quickly. "I'm not asking for promises or declarations. I just needed you to know. Needed you to understand that when I look at you, I don't see broken goods or scandal or any of the things other people see. I see the woman I want to spend the rest of my life with." Eleanor's hands were shaking. Her whole body was shaking. 6 months ago, she'd been drowning in Denver, destroyed by lies and abandoned by everyone she'd thought she could trust. She'd come to Montana expecting nothing, hoping for nothing beyond simple survival. And here was Caleb Ward, this good, honest man, offering her everything. "I love you too," she heard herself say. The words felt both terrifying and inevitable, like stepping off a cliff into darkness, trusting there would be something solid to catch her fall. "I've been trying not to, trying to protect myself from getting hurt again, but I love you, Caleb, so much it scares me." His smile was like sunrise, bright and warm and full of promise. "Can I kiss you?" Eleanor nodded, not trusting her voice. Caleb stepped closer, one hand coming up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. Then he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers, gentle and questioning, giving her every opportunity to pull away. She didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned into the kiss, her hands coming up to rest on his chest, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart under her palms. The kiss deepened, became something more than gentle, and Eleanor felt years of loneliness and fear crack open inside her, letting in light and hope and the terrifying possibility of happiness.
When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "I want to marry you," he whispered. "Not now, not until you're ready, but someday. I want to wake up beside you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. Want to build a life with you, a family maybe, if you want children. Want to grow old watching you create beautiful things and make the world better just by being in it." Eleanor laughed, the sound watery but genuine. "That's quite a future you're planning." "Is it too much?" "No." She pulled back enough to meet his eyes. "It's perfect. Terrifying and perfect." "So that's a yes? Someday?" Eleanor thought about everything she'd survived. The betrayal in Denver, the hostile reception in Willow Creek, the constant battle to prove her worth. She thought about Sheriff Dawson's bullet and Mrs. Whitman's cold disapproval and all the countless small cruelties she'd endured. And then she thought about Caleb standing up to the sheriff, about Mrs. Chen's kindness, about Molly's fierce loyalty. She thought about the shop that was finally thriving, about Margaret's wedding dress waiting upstairs, about the life she was building stitch by careful stitch. She thought about Caleb's earth-brown eyes and patient heart, about the way he saw her, really saw her, when everyone else saw only scandal and shame. "Yes," she said firmly. "Someday, when we're both ready. Yes." Caleb kissed her again, longer this time, deeper, until Eleanor felt dizzy with joy and desire and overwhelming relief. When he finally pulled away, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I should let you get some rest," he said, though he made no move to leave. "You have work tomorrow." "I do." Eleanor stepped back reluctantly. "But Caleb, thank you for seeing me, for believing in me, for loving me." "Easiest thing I've ever done," he said simply. She watched him ride away into the darkness, then climbed the stairs to her rooms feeling lighter than she had in months, maybe years. She was in love, and she was loved in return, and somehow, against all odds, she was building a home in this wild Montana town. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of final preparations. Margaret's dress was completed with 2 days to spare, every bead perfect, every seam invisible, every detail exactly as the bride had dreamed. Eleanor hung it carefully in the back room, covering it with muslin to protect it until the final fitting. That fitting took place on a Thursday afternoon, with Margaret arriving breathless and excited, her mother trailing behind with her usual expression of critical assessment. "Let's see it then," Mrs. Whitman said without preamble. Eleanor led them to the back room and carefully unveiled the dress. Margaret gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "Oh," she breathed. "Oh, Miss Blake, it's perfect. It's more than perfect." The dress gleamed in the afternoon light, the silk and lace creating an effect that was both elegant and ethereal. Eleanor had poured her heart into every inch of it, and seeing Margaret's face made every late night and cramped finger worth it. "Try it on," Eleanor urged gently. "Let's make sure everything fits properly." She helped Margaret into the dress, carefully fastening the tiny buttons that ran down the back. The fit was flawless. The bodice hugged Margaret's figure without being too tight. The skirt fell in perfect folds. The train swept behind her like a river of silk. Margaret turned to the mirror and burst into tears. "I'm sorry," she sobbed, laughing through her tears. "I'm not sad, it's so beautiful, and I feel beautiful in it, and I never thought I'd find a dress that made me feel this way." Even Mrs. Whitman looked moved, though she quickly composed herself. "It's adequate," she said, which was probably the highest praise she was capable of giving. "It's spectacular," Margaret corrected, turning to embrace Eleanor impulsively. "Thank you. Thank you so much." After they left, Margaret still dabbing at her happy tears, Mrs. Whitman issuing final instructions about the wedding day, Eleanor sank into her chair, exhausted but triumphant. She'd done it. The dress was finished, and it was perfect, and Margaret loved it. Molly danced around the shop, humming the wedding march. "You did it, Miss Blake. You actually did it. Now everyone in the territory is going to want you to make their dresses." "Let's get through this wedding first," Eleanor cautioned, but she was smiling. The wedding was scheduled for Saturday afternoon in the small church at the edge of town, with a reception to follow at the community hall. Eleanor wasn't planning to attend. She'd delivered the dress on Friday morning and considered her job complete. But Friday evening, Margaret appeared at the shop door with a cream-colored envelope. "It's an invitation," she said, pressing it into Eleanor's hands. "Please say you'll come. I know Mother didn't include you on the official guest list, but I'm inviting you personally. You created something so beautiful for me. You should be there to see me wear it." Eleanor looked at the invitation, feeling the weight of what Margaret was asking. Attending would put her in the same room as all of Willow Creek's elite, many of whom still viewed her with suspicion. It would be another test, another gauntlet to run, but it would also be a celebration of her work, a public acknowledgement of her skill and place in the community. "I'll be there," Eleanor promised, "and thank you, Margaret, for everything." Saturday dawned clear and bright, perfect autumn weather for a wedding. Eleanor dressed carefully in a new dress she'd made for herself, deep blue wool with black velvet trim, elegant without being ostentatious. She wanted to look professional, respectable, like a successful businesswoman rather than a former scandal. Caleb arrived to escort her, looking handsome in his good suit. "Ready?" he asked, offering his arm. "Ready," Eleanor confirmed, though her stomach was doing nervous flips. The church was packed, every pew filled with Willow Creek's finest families. Eleanor felt the stares as she and Caleb entered, felt the whispers ripple through the crowd. But she kept her head high and her expression serene, following Caleb to a pew near the back. Sheriff Dawson sat across the aisle, his face dark with disapproval. Mrs. Whitman's friends clustered near the front, their expressions ranging from curious to hostile. But Mrs. Patterson waved from her seat, and Mrs. Chen gave Eleanor an encouraging smile, and Alice Thornton nodded in greeting. The ceremony began with the traditional processional. Margaret's bridesmaids came first, then the flower girls scattering petals, and finally, Margaret herself on her father's arm. The church went silent. Margaret looked like a princess from a fairy tale. The wedding dress caught the light streaming through the stained glass windows, the silk and lace creating an effect that was nothing short of magical. She moved with confidence and grace, her face radiant with joy, and Eleanor felt pride swell in her chest. This was what she'd been meant to create, not just a dress, but a moment of pure beauty and happiness. The ceremony proceeded with traditional vows and readings. The groom, a pleasant-looking young man with kind eyes, looked at Margaret like she'd hung the moon. It was sweet and sincere and exactly what a wedding should be. When the minister finally pronounced them husband and wife, the church erupted in applause. Margaret and her new husband walked back down the aisle, beaming at everyone. And as they passed Eleanor's pew, Margaret paused deliberately. "Thank you," she mouthed, her eyes shining. Eleanor nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. The reception at the community hall was lavish by Willow Creek standards. Tables groaned under the weight of food and drink, musicians played cheerful tunes, and the whole town seemed determined to celebrate. Eleanor and Caleb found a relatively quiet corner where they could observe without being too conspicuous, but Eleanor found herself becoming the center of attention anyway. One by one, women approached her, some she knew, some she didn't, all wanting to compliment the wedding dress, to ask about commissioning work, to express admiration for her skill. "That dress was extraordinary," one rancher's wife gushed. "I've never seen anything like it. You have a real gift, Miss Blake." "My daughter's getting married next spring," another woman said. "I'd be honored if you'd make her wedding dress." Even some of Mrs. Whitman's friends broke ranks to offer stilted but genuine praise. The dress was undeniable proof of Eleanor's talent, and not even the most determined gossip could pretend otherwise. Mrs. Whitman herself approached as the evening was winding down. She looked tired but satisfied, the expression of a mother whose daughter's wedding had gone exactly as planned. "Miss Blake," she said formally, "I wanted to thank you for your work on Margaret's dress. It exceeded my expectations." "I'm glad Margaret was pleased," Eleanor replied diplomatically. Mrs. Whitman's expression shifted slightly, becoming something almost resembling respect. "You've proven yourself a skilled craftsman and a woman of integrity. I was wrong about you." "Not entirely wrong," she added quickly. "You're still far too forward in your manners, and your association with Mr. Ward remains questionable. But you're not the calculating seductress I believed you to be. It was possibly the worst phrased compliment Eleanor had ever received, but she recognized it for what it was. Amelia Whitman's version of an apology. I appreciate you saying so, Mrs. Whitman. Yes, well. The older woman smoothed her skirt. I suppose I should also mention that the Ladies' Aid Society will be voting on new members next month. Your name has been put forward for consideration. Eleanor's eyes widened. By whom? By me, Mrs. Whitman said crisply. You may not be my first choice for society membership, Miss Blake, but you're a businesswoman of skill and standing. That counts for something. She walked away before Eleanor could respond, leaving her standing there in shock. Caleb appeared at her elbow, 2 glasses of punch in hand. Did Amelia Whitman just endorse you for the Ladies' Aid Society? I think she did, Eleanor said faintly. I'm not entirely sure it wasn't a hallucination. It wasn't. Caleb handed her a glass, his eyes warm with pride. You've won, Eleanor. You've proven yourself beyond any doubt. This town is yours now if you want it. Eleanor looked around the hall, at the people laughing and dancing, at Margaret spinning in her beautiful dress, at the community coming together in celebration. 6 months ago, she'd arrived in Willow Creek broken and desperate, expecting nothing beyond basic survival. Now she had a thriving business, genuine friends, and the love of a good man. She had respect and acceptance and the promise of belonging. She had everything she'd lost in Denver and more. Yes, she said softly, turning to Caleb with tears in her eyes. I want it, all of it. He pulled her close, right there in the middle of the reception, with everyone watching, and kissed her forehead gently. Then it's yours, he whispered, all of it, including me. As the night wore on and the celebration continued around them, Eleanor felt something shift inside her chest. The fear that had lived there for so long, the constant anxiety that everything would be taken away, it was finally, blessedly quiet. She was home. She was loved. She was free. And she was ready, at last, to believe in her own happy ending. The moon rose high over Willow Creek, casting silver light over the mountains and valleys, over the town and its people, over Eleanor Blake and Caleb Ward standing together in the warm glow of the community hall. And in that moment, surrounded by music and laughter and the promise of tomorrow, Eleanor knew that the worst was truly behind her. What lay ahead was simply the beautiful, ordinary work of building a life worth living. The weeks following Margaret's wedding brought an Indian summer to Montana, warm golden days that felt like a final gift before winter's arrival. Eleanor's shop flourished beyond anything she'd dared imagine. The success of the wedding dress had transformed her from tolerated outsider to sought-after artisan, and her appointment book filled with commissions from across the territory. Women traveled from neighboring towns just to have Eleanor Blake create something beautiful for them. But success, Eleanor was learning, came with its own complications. She was working late one October evening, putting finishing touches on a christening gown for the blacksmith's daughter, when someone pounded on the shop door with urgent force. Eleanor's heart jumped. Late-night knocking never brought good news. She set down her needle and hurried to the door, peering through the glass before opening it. Sheriff Dawson stood on the boardwalk, his face grim in the lamplight. Eleanor's stomach dropped, but she unlocked the door with steady hands. "Sheriff, what can I do for you?" "Need to speak with you," he said, his voice rough. "About Ward." Fear shot through her like ice water. "What about him? Is he hurt?" "Not hurt. Missing." Dawson removed his hat, turning it in his hands. He didn't show up in town today like he was supposed to. Didn't collect his mail, didn't meet with the feed supplier. His ranch hands came looking for him. He rode out yesterday afternoon and never came back. Eleanor grabbed the doorframe to steady herself. "Missing? For how long?" "Near 24 hours now. Could be nothing. Horse could have thrown a shoe, could have gotten delayed tracking a lost calf, but Ward's not the type to disappear without word." Dawson's jaw tightened. "And there's been talk of cattle rustlers working the North Range. 3 ranches hit in the past month." "We need to organize a search," Eleanor said immediately, already reaching for her shawl. "Get men together? Search the ranch lands?" "Already doing that," Dawson interrupted. "Got a party heading out at first light. I'm here because Ward's housekeeper said if anything happened to him, we should tell you." He paused, something almost like regret crossing his face. Said you'd want to know. Eleanor met his eyes, searching for deception or cruelty, but found only weary honesty. Thank you for telling me. Miss Blake. Dawson shifted uncomfortably. I haven't been fair to you, or to Ward. Been carrying my sister's death like a weapon, using it to hurt anyone who reminded me I couldn't save her. He looked away. That was wrong of me. And if something's happened to Caleb because I was too busy nursing grudges to do my job properly, nothing's happened to him, Eleanor said firmly, refusing to let her mind go to dark places. We're going to find him, and he's going to be fine. Dawson nodded, settling his hat back on his head. Search party leaves at dawn. We could use every able-bodied person willing to ride. I'll be there, Eleanor said. After he left, she stood in the empty shop, her hands trembling with fear and adrenaline. Caleb was missing. The man she loved was somewhere out there in the Montana wilderness, possibly hurt, possibly... No, she wouldn't think it. Couldn't think it. She locked up the shop and climbed the stairs to her rooms, but sleep was impossible. Instead, she packed supplies, bandages, water, food, and laid out her most practical riding clothes. She'd learned to ride as a girl before her family lost their money, and she'd gone into service. The skills came back quickly when necessity demanded. Dawn arrived too slowly and too quickly at once. Eleanor dressed in her sturdy wool skirt and jacket, braided her hair tightly, and made her way to the livery stable where the search party was assembling. Perhaps 20 people had gathered, ranchers, ranch hands, townsmen with tracking experience. Miss Chen was there with supplies and worried eyes. Molly's father had brought horses for those who needed them, and standing at the center of it all, organizing the search with unexpected efficiency, was Sheriff Dawson. We'll split into 4 groups, he was saying as Eleanor approached. Cover the main rangelands, the North Trail toward the mountains, the creek beds, and the border with the Thompson property. Ward's hands know his usual routes. They'll lead each group. He caught sight of Eleanor, and something flickered across his face. Miss Blake, you sure about this? It's rough country, and we don't know what we'll find. I'm sure, Eleanor said steadily. Which group needs another rider? One of Caleb's ranch hands, a weathered man named Pete, stepped forward. I'm taking the North Trail toward Copper Canyon. That's where Mr. Ward said he was heading yesterday, looking for strays that might have wandered up the high pastures. I'll ride with you, Eleanor said. Pete looked her up and down, assessing. Can you handle rough terrain? I can handle whatever's necessary. He nodded, apparently satisfied. Mount up then. We're burning daylight. The ride into the mountains was hard and beautiful. The trail wound through stands of aspen and pine, their leaves and needles painting the world in gold and green. The air grew thinner as they climbed, crisp and sharp in Eleanor's lungs. Pete and 2 other ranch hands led the way, reading signs in the dirt and bent grass that Eleanor couldn't see, evidence of Caleb's passage the day before. They'd been riding for perhaps 3 hours when Pete held up a hand, signaling them to stop. There, he said, pointing to a disturbed area of earth near a rocky outcropping. Signs of a struggle. Multiple horses. And look. He dismounted and examined the ground more closely. Blood. Eleanor's heart seized. She slid from her horse before she'd fully decided to move, hurrying to where Pete crouched, examining the ground. How much blood? She demanded. Could he be? Not enough for a killing wound, Pete said quickly. Looks like someone got grazed. Could be Ward, could be whoever he tangled with. He stood scanning the surrounding terrain. Tracks lead that way, toward the old mining camp. 3 horses, moving fast. Rustlers? One of the other hands asked. Likely. Probably ran into Ward while moving stolen cattle, decided he'd seen too much. Pete's expression was grim. They've got maybe 12 hours head start on us. Then we ride faster, Eleanor said. Pete looked at her with something like respect. Yes, ma'am, we do. They followed the trail for another hour, the terrain growing rougher and more treacherous. The old mining camp appeared in a valley between 2 ridges, a collection of abandoned buildings slowly being reclaimed by the wilderness. Smoke rose from one of the structures, thin and gray against the blue sky. Pete signaled them to dismount and approach quietly. They left the horses tied in a copse of trees and moved forward on foot, using the scrubby vegetation for cover. As they drew closer, Eleanor could hear voices, harsh male laughter and the occasional curse. And then, cutting through the other sounds, Caleb's voice. "You boys are making a mistake. Sheriff knows I came up this way. When I don't come back, he'll send search parties. You'd be smarter to let me go now while you still can." Relief flooded through Eleanor so intensely she nearly sobbed. He was alive, hurt, maybe, but alive and conscious and still fighting. Pete motioned for them to circle around the building, positioning themselves at different vantage points. Eleanor found herself pressed against the rough wood of the cabin wall, peering through a gap in the boards. Inside, she could see Caleb tied to a chair, his face bruised and blood staining his shirt sleeve. 3 men stood around him, rough-looking characters with the wary eyes of men who lived outside the law. One of them, a big man with a scarred face, leaned close to Caleb with obvious menace. "Sheriff Dawson won't look too hard for you, Ward," the man said. "Everyone knows you two got bad blood. He'll probably thank us for doing his dirty work." "You don't know Dawson as well as you think," Caleb replied, his voice steady despite his circumstances. "Man's got his faults, but he's not corrupt. He'll hunt you to the ends of the earth for this." The scarred man backhanded Caleb across the face, snapping his head to the side. Eleanor bit her lip hard to keep from crying out. "Enough talk," another rustler said nervously. "We need to decide what to do with him. Can't just keep him tied up forever. Could solve the problem permanently," the third man suggested, his hand drifting to his gun. "No killing," the scarred man said firmly. "Stealing cattle's one thing. Murder brings federal marshals. We'll hold him till nightfall, then ride out and leave him tied. By the time he gets loose or someone finds him, we'll be halfway to Wyoming." Eleanor met Pete's eyes through the gap in the boards. He held up 3 fingers, then pointed to himself and the other 2 ranch hands, indicating their positions. Then he looked at Eleanor and shook his head firmly. "Stay here. Stay safe." But Eleanor had already made up her mind. She moved quietly around to the back of the cabin where the wood had rotted through in places, leaving gaps large enough to see through. She found a window, high and narrow, probably left over from when this had been a bunkhouse for miners. With careful effort, she managed to pry it open enough to squeeze through. The cabin's interior was dim and smelled of dust and old smoke. Eleanor dropped to the floor as quietly as she could, landing in what had once been a storage room. Through the doorway, she could see into the main room where Caleb was being held. She needed a weapon, needed something, anything, to give Pete and the others an advantage when they made their move. Her eyes adjusted to the dimness, and she spotted an old iron poker leaning against the cold fireplace. Better than nothing. She picked it up, testing its weight, and began creeping toward the main room. Her heart hammered so hard she was certain everyone could hear it. One of the rustlers had his back to her, standing by the window keeping watch. The other 2 were arguing about their next move, their attention focused on each other rather than their surroundings. And Caleb, bless him, spotted her almost immediately. His eyes widened fractionally, then he deliberately looked away, coughing to cover any reaction. Eleanor raised the poker and brought it down on the watching rustler's head with all her strength. He dropped like a stone. The other 2 spun around, reaching for their guns, but Pete and the ranch hands burst through the front door at the same moment. Chaos erupted, shouting, struggling, the crack of a gunshot that went wild, hitting the ceiling and showering everyone with splinters. Eleanor dove for Caleb, her shaking fingers working at the ropes binding his wrists. The scarred rustler lunged for her, but Caleb somehow managed to tip his chair sideways, tangling his feet in the man's legs and sending him sprawling. "The knife!" Caleb gasped. "In my boot!" Eleanor found it and sawed through the ropes with desperate speed. The moment Caleb was free, he surged to his feet, swaying slightly but moving with purpose. He grabbed the scarred man by the collar and drove a fist into his face with satisfying force. Within minutes, it was over. The 3 rustlers were subdued, one unconscious from Eleanor's blow, the other 2 held at gunpoint by Pete and his companions. The ranch hands secured them with the same ropes that had bound Caleb. Then Caleb turned to Eleanor and his expression was equal parts fury and relief. "What in God's name were you thinking?" he demanded, pulling her into his arms despite his injuries. "You could have been killed, coming in here alone, attacking armed men."
I was thinking that I love you and you were in danger, Eleanor said, her voice muffled against his chest. And I wasn't alone. I had Pete and the others. Who had a plan that didn't involve you risking your neck? Your plan was working beautifully until I improved it, Eleanor pointed out, pulling back to look at him properly. His face was bruised, his shirt was bloody, and he was the most beautiful sight she'd ever seen. You're hurt. I'm fine. Bullet grazed my arm, nothing serious. He cupped her face in his hands, his eyes intense. Eleanor Blake, you're the bravest, most foolish, most magnificent woman I've ever met, and you just took 10 years off my life. Good thing we're getting married then, Eleanor said. You can spend the next 50 years paying me back. Caleb laughed, then winced. Is that a proposal? It's a statement of fact. Eleanor's hands were starting to shake now that the danger had passed. I almost lost you today, Caleb. I'm not waiting anymore. Not for the perfect time or the right circumstances or for people to stop talking. Life's too short and too uncertain. Eleanor, marry me, she said firmly. Soon. Next month, next week, tomorrow if the preacher's available. I don't care about big ceremonies or fancy dresses, though God knows I can make my own dress. I just want to be your wife. Caleb's smile was like sunrise, bright and warm despite the blood and bruises. Yes, he said simply. Yes to all of it.
Tomorrow? Next week? Whenever you want. Yes. He kissed her then, there in the dusty mining cabin with bound rustlers groaning on the floor and ranch hands tactfully looking away. It was a kiss that tasted of blood and dust and promise, and Eleanor had never felt anything more perfect. Pete cleared his throat. Hate to interrupt, but we should probably get these men back to town and get Mr. Ward to the doctor. The ride back to Willow Creek took the rest of the day. They met up with the other search parties and Sheriff Dawson, who looked genuinely relieved to find Caleb alive. He took custody of the rustlers with grim satisfaction. Got warrants out for all three of them, he said. Cattle theft, assault, probably a dozen other charges. They'll hang or spend the rest of their lives in prison. Good, Caleb said flatly. The doctor patched up Caleb's arm and pronounced him battered but fundamentally sound. Keep it clean, get some rest, try not to get kidnapped by criminals for at least a few weeks, he prescribed dryly. Word of Eleanor's role in the rescue spread through town like wildfire. By evening, she couldn't walk down the street without people stopping to congratulate her, to express amazement at her courage, to declare she was a true daughter of Montana now. Mrs. Patterson cornered her outside the dress shop. Heard you knocked a rustler unconscious with a fireplace poker. I did, Eleanor confirmed. Good for you. The old woman's eyes gleamed with approval. Been saying all along you had spine. Now everyone else knows it too. Even Mrs. Whitman unbent enough to stop by the shop the next morning. I heard about your adventure, Miss Blake. It was reckless and inappropriate and utterly admirable. You saved Mr. Ward's life. I helped, Eleanor corrected. Pete and the ranch hands did most of the work. Don't be modest. It's unbecoming. Mrs. Whitman smoothed her skirts. I also heard rumors that you and Mr. Ward are planning to marry. Is this true? Eleanor lifted her chin. It is. We haven't set a date yet, but yes, we're getting married. Well, Mrs. Whitman's expression was unreadable. I suppose I should offer my congratulations. You've certainly proven yourself a woman of character, if not always of conventional behavior. Willow Creek could do worse than having you as Mrs. Caleb Ward. It was, Eleanor reflected, possibly the nicest thing Amelia Whitman had ever said to her. The wedding was planned for Christmas Eve, giving Eleanor just enough time to create a dress worthy of the occasion. She worked on it in secret late at night after the shop closed, pouring all her skill and love into every stitch. It was simpler than Margaret's elaborate gown, cream-colored silk with burgundy velvet trim, elegant and timeless rather than fashionable. Molly caught her working on it one evening and literally squealed with excitement. Miss Blake, it's gorgeous! You're going to be the most beautiful bride Montana has ever seen. I'm going to be a married woman, Eleanor corrected, but she was smiling. That's all that matters. The weeks before the wedding passed in a happy blur. Caleb came by the shop every day, usually with some excuse, but really just to see her, to talk about their future, to make plans for their life together.
They would live at the Broken Spur, he said, but Eleanor could keep the dress shop if she wanted. He'd help her hire someone to manage it, or she could sell it, whatever made her happy. I want to keep it, Eleanor decided. Not necessarily run it every day, but keep it as mine, something I built, something that proved I could survive and thrive on my own. Then we'll keep it, Caleb agreed, though I hope you'll spend at least some time at the ranch. Mrs. Chen's getting old and she could use help, and, he paused, looking uncertain, I was hoping we might start a family. Eventually.
If you want children. Eleanor felt her heart expand. I want everything with you, she said softly. Children, a home, a life. All of it. 2 days before the wedding, a telegram arrived from Denver. Eleanor stared at it with trepidation, half expecting more trouble from the Montgomerys. Instead, she found a message from Anna Chen. Heard about your wedding. Stop. So happy for you. Stop. Mr. Montgomery arrested for assault on another governess. Stop. His wife finally left him. Stop. Truth came out. Stop. You were right all along. Stop. Congratulations and best wishes. Stop, Anna. Eleanor read it 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Vindication, complete, undeniable vindication. The truth had come out, just as she'd always known it would. She showed the telegram to Caleb that evening, and he held her while she cried, not from sadness, but from relief. The last shadow of her past had finally lifted. Christmas Eve arrived with fresh snow covering Willow Creek like a blessing. The small church was decorated with pine boughs and candles, and despite the short notice, it seemed like half the town had come to witness the wedding. Eleanor stood in the small room off the sanctuary, adjusting her cream-colored dress for the 100th time. Molly fussed with her hair, which they'd arranged in soft curls threaded with burgundy ribbon. Mrs. Chen had given her a beautiful shawl as a wedding gift, soft wool in a pattern that had been her mother's. You look perfect, Molly declared. Mr. Ward's going to cry when he sees you. I hope not, Eleanor said, though secretly she hoped he would, just a little. Mrs. Patterson appeared in the doorway, looking unusually emotional. It's time, dear. Are you ready? Was she ready? Eleanor thought about the journey that had brought her here, the betrayal in Denver, the hostile reception in Willow Creek, the slow, painful process of rebuilding her life. She thought about Caleb defending her in the street, about standing up to Sheriff Dawson and Warren Sutter, about rescuing the man she loved from rustlers. She thought about all the people who'd shown her kindness, Mrs. Chen and Molly, Alice Thornton and Judge Wilson, even grudging Mrs. Whitman. She thought about the shop she'd built and the respect she'd earned and the life she'd created from nothing but determination and skill. She thought about Caleb waiting at the altar, about the future they would build together, about love that had survived scandal and danger and doubt. Yes, Eleanor said firmly. I'm ready. She walked down the aisle alone, no father to give her away, no family to stand beside her. But she didn't feel alone. The church was full of friends and neighbors, people who'd come to celebrate her happiness. And at the end of the aisle stood Caleb, looking impossibly handsome in his good suit, his eyes shining with love and pride. When she reached him, he took her hands and whispered, You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. You're not so bad yourself, Eleanor whispered back, making him smile. The ceremony was simple and perfect. Traditional vows spoken with whole hearts, promises made to love and honor through all the days ahead. When the preacher finally pronounced them husband and wife, Caleb kissed her with such tender joy that Eleanor felt her last defenses crumble completely. She was married. She was loved. She was home. The reception at the community hall was lively and warm, full of good food and laughter and dancing. Sheriff Dawson approached them during a lull in the festivities, looking uncomfortable but determined. Ward, Mrs. Ward. He addressed them both formally. I wanted to apologize, properly, for everything I put you both through. I let grief make me cruel, and that was wrong. You deserved better, and he looked at Caleb directly. Catherine would have been ashamed of me. She always said hatred was a poison we drink hoping it will hurt someone else. Caleb studied him for a long moment, then held out his hand. I appreciate that, Tom, and for what it's worth, I loved your sister. Her death nearly destroyed me. But it wasn't your fault or mine. It just was. Dawson shook his hand, his eyes suspiciously bright. She'd be glad you found happiness again. And Miss Blake, Mrs. Ward, she's a good woman, better than I gave her credit for. She's the best woman, Caleb corrected, pulling Eleanor close. And I'm the luckiest man alive. As the evening wore on and the celebration continued around them, Eleanor found herself standing at the window, looking out at the snow-covered town. Caleb came to stand beside her, his arm warm around her waist. Happy? He asked. So happy I can barely breathe, Eleanor admitted. 6 months ago, I arrived here expecting nothing, hoping for nothing. And now you have everything, Caleb finished. Because you're brave and strong and you never gave up. You built this life, Eleanor, all by yourself. Not all by myself. She turned to face him, placing her hand over his heart. I had help. From you, from friends I didn't know I'd make, from people who saw me instead of just the scandal. I couldn't have done it alone. Maybe not, Caleb conceded. But you did the hardest part. You kept going when it would have been easier to give up. You stood your ground and demanded to be seen. That's courage, Eleanor. That's strength. Outside, the snow continued to fall, silent and beautiful. Inside, the community that had once rejected Eleanor now celebrated her marriage, accepted her presence, welcomed her home. Years later, when their children asked how their parents fell in love, Eleanor would tell them the truth. She'd tell them about arriving in Willow Creek broken and desperate, about a sheriff's bullet in a stranger's defense, about being called broken goods, and choosing to see it as an opportunity rather than an insult. She'd tell them about learning that sometimes the most broken things, when put back together carefully, become the strongest, about how love doesn't require perfection. It requires honesty and courage and the willingness to be seen, flaws and all. She'd tell them about their father standing in a dusty street and declaring that broken goods were the only kind he'd ever buy again, and how those words had changed her life. But that night, on Christmas Eve in Willow Creek, Montana, with snow falling outside and music playing inside, and Caleb's arms around her, Eleanor didn't think about the past or worry about the future. She simply stood in the present moment, grateful and whole and perfectly, completely happy. She'd been called broken once, called ruined and used and worthless. But standing there in her husband's embrace, surrounded by friends and community, in the town that had become her home and the life she'd built with her own 2 hands, Eleanor Blake Ward knew the truth. She'd never been broken. She'd just been bent by life's storms, tested by circumstances beyond her control. And like the strongest steel, she'd emerged from the fire harder, more resilient, more herself than she'd ever been before. The broken goods they'd scorned had become something precious, something rare, something unbreakable. And in the heart of the Montana wilderness, in a small town where she'd once been unwelcome, Eleanor had found something she'd thought was lost forever. She'd found home. She'd found love. She'd found herself. And that, she thought as Caleb pressed a kiss to her temple and pulled her closer, was the best kind of happy ending there was. The musicians struck up another tune, and Caleb led her back to the dance floor. As they moved together to the music, Eleanor caught Mrs. Patterson's eye across the room. The old woman raised her glass in a toast, her weathered face creased in a smile. To new beginnings, the gesture seemed to say. To second chances and hard-won victories and love that refuses to quit. Eleanor smiled back, then rested her head on Caleb's shoulder and let herself simply feel the moment, the warmth of his body, the joy in her heart, the absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. She'd come to Montana with nothing but a trunk full of clothes and a heart full of wounds. She'd been tested and judged and nearly destroyed. But she'd survived. More than survived. She'd thrived. And now, as midnight approached and Christmas Day drew near, Eleanor Ward danced with her husband and looked toward the future with hope instead of fear, with confidence instead of doubt. The cowboy had chosen broken goods, and the broken goods had chosen him right back. Together, they were whole. Together, they were home. Together, they were unbreakable. And that was more than enough. That was everything.